Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Son, I am very sick, and I ask that you listen to me in a hoarse voice, his father said. Harry was lying in a hospital bed. Even though it was a VIP room, he didn't feel happy. The man had only recently been here. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was in the active stage is quite a dangerous disease, as it often ends in death. It's quite rare nowadays because of the corporatization. But Harry, like the rest of his community, had never been immunized. I'm listening to you, Dad. Felix spoke up. Somehow I've already figured it out. I have a fatal disease. Dad started, and then he started coughing. It can be cured. However, the doctors said that I am on. Harry couldn't finish. A coughing fit came over him again. When he was in so much pain, they had to call a nurse to give him an injection, which Felix did. After a few minutes, his father was able to speak again. You just take your time, hurriedly whispered caring guy, covering his father's hand with his palm. Well, in the first stages of still help pills, antibiotics. But I'm already old, Felix, and these drugs will not help me. I'll probably have to go under the surgical knife, but you know that's not my choice. So now listen to me carefully. The son nodded understandingly. Me and your mom. Harry waved his head back, pointing to the woman who sat after him. The man gave another cough and continued with me and Sophia. We want you to get married, son. Harry didn't continue because he saw son's eyes rounded. He didn't like that statement. His eyebrows tensed and lowered again. He was indignant. However, like an obedient son, he said nothing. We've already found you a nice girl, the father continued. Realizing that his son was trying to be patient, Felix's gaze shifted to his mother. She smiled and tried to support her son with gestures, urging him to agree. But he suddenly decided to change the accepted line of behavior in the family. No, the boy cut off. I am definitely against this proposal. Son, understand me. I'm an old man at death's door, and I want to make sure my son chooses his wife. According to our covenants and requirements, Harry insisted. A girl of our faith. And you know how hard it is to find a family here that is dedicated. Felix rolled his eyes and removed his palm from his father's hand. Who is she? The boy muttered offensively. This girl was born in the same village we came from with your mom. So she's a beggar, Felix blurted without hiding his indignation. Of course, he was not a major, though he lived in a wealthy family. The boy had been brought up well enough, never divided people by race, appearance, or money. He treated the poor well, fulfilled the requirements of his family religion. However, the guy did not want to see his wives as beggars, for almost all of them, with few exceptions, were ugly and stupid. Such was his personal prejudice. Don't call your future wife that. What kind of upbringing is that? Where is the respect for your father? Harry said angrily. Harry, Sophia exclaimed, turning to her husband. Harry slowly turned to his wife. Why am I wrong? He has no right to talk like that about the girl I found for him. The son rolled his eyes once more, abruptly stood up and left the room. Sophia moved closer to Harry's husband. Darling, but why did you have to go off on him like that? Depressed, the woman sighed. He has only just begun to realize in some state, and he is not 16 years old. Sophia, he's a mature young man who I thought was mature enough to have this conversation. Stop coddling him. He needs a wife, Sophia. And I found the perfect girl, the man said sternly. Harry had another coughing fit and could no longer speak. Sophia looked sympathetically at her sick husband and hoped that her son would fulfill his last will. Honey, are you busy? Asked the mother, entering Felix's office. That same day in the evening, he was sorting out some documents. Son, I am very sick, and I ask that you listen to me in a hoarse voice, his father said. Harry was lying in a hospital bed. Even though it was a VIP room, he didn't feel happy. The man had only recently been here. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was in the active stage is quite a dangerous disease, as it often ends in death. It's quite rare nowadays because of the corporatization. But Harry, like the rest of his community, had never been immunized. I'm listening to you, Dad. Felix spoke up. Somehow I've already figured it out. I have a fatal disease. Dad started, and then he started coughing. It can be cured. However, the doctors said that I am on. Harry couldn't finish. A coughing fit came over him again. When he was in so much pain, they had to call a nurse to give him an injection, which Felix did. After a few minutes, his father was able to speak again. "You just take your time," hurriedly whispered caring guy, covering his father's hand with his palm. "Well, in the first stages of still help pills, antibiotics. But I'm already old, Felix, and these drugs will not help me. I'll probably have to go under the surgical knife, but you know that's not my choice. So now listen to me carefully." The son nodded understandingly. "Me and your mom." Harry waved his head back, pointing to the woman who sat after him. The man gave another cough and continued with me and Sophia. "We want you to get married, son." Harry didn't continue because he saw son's eyes rounded. He didn't like that statement. His eyebrows tensed and lowered again. He was indignant. However, like an obedient son, he said nothing. "We've already found you a nice girl," the father continued. Realizing that his son was trying to be patient, Felix's gaze shifted to his mother. She smiled and tried to support her son with gestures, urging him to agree. But he suddenly decided to change the accepted line of behavior in the family. "No," the boy cut off. "I am definitely against this proposal. Son, understand me. I'm an old man at death's door, and I want to make sure my son chooses his wife according to our covenants and requirements," Harry insisted. "A girl of our faith. And you know how hard it is to find a family here that is dedicated." Felix rolled his eyes and removed his palm from his father's hand. "Who is she?" The boy muttered offensively. "This girl was born in the same village we came from with your mom." "So she's a beggar," Felix blurted without hiding his indignation. Of course, he was not a major, though he lived in a wealthy family. The boy had been brought up well enough, never divided people by race, appearance, or money. He treated the poor well, fulfilled the requirements of his family religion. However, the guy did not want to see his wives as beggars, for almost all of them, with few exceptions, were ugly and stupid. Such was his personal prejudice. Don't call your future wife that. What kind of upbringing is that? Where is the respect for your father? Harry said angrily. Harry, Sophia exclaimed, turning to her husband. Harry slowly turned to his wife. Why am I wrong? He has no right to talk like that about the girl I found for him. The son rolled his eyes once more, abruptly stood up and left the room. Sophia moved closer to Harry's husband. Darling, but why did you have to go off on him like that? Depressed, the woman sighed. He has only just begun to realize in some state, and he is not 16 years old. Sophia, he's a mature young man who I thought was mature enough to have this conversation. Stop coddling him. He needs a wife, Sophia. And I found the perfect girl, the man said sternly. Harry had another coughing fit and could no longer speak. Sophia looked sympathetically at her sick husband and hoped that her son would fulfill his last will. Honey, are you busy? Asked the mother, entering Felix's office. That same day in the evening, he was sorting out some documents. The desk was a terrible mess, as was the whole room in general. His mother never entered the place without asking, because she knew that her son should not be distracted when he was working. They lived in the same apartment, but it was very large and could accommodate 3 families at once. Felix's parents were engaged in the florist Chechen business, had a network of flower stores, invested in securities, and Felix also knew stock quotes and made good money on it in addition to the parental income. Harry used to run the family business, and his son helped him. However, when the man fell ill, Felix began to solve all the cases himself. He was a savvy and intelligent young man for his 23 years. He knew a lot about running a business and economy, and about working with people. He really managed to handle all the issues in the absence of his father and the client. The flow was only increasing every quarter, and so was the income. Sophia was proud of him. Though she never got into the business, her husband and son always shared their successes with her, and she was the fairy of a cozy home. Sophia was also fond of Florentine and sometimes supervised the designers who decorated the shop windows. And sometimes she had a hand in it herself, which brought her immense pleasure. Their family was strong, everyone supported each other and lived in perfect harmony. Felix loved his mother very much. She was gentle, attentive, caring, and, in general, had all the qualities of a good wife, mother, and mistress. His father was strict, demanding, but fair and kind. Never condemned people, gave sound advice, and sometimes punished for the cause, believing that it is not necessary to wait until fate itself will give Felix life lessons. The guy loved his parents very much. They really always supported him in all endeavors, and he was very happy about it. "Ladies, come in," replied Felix, without raising his head. He was now carefully looking through the documents, because he decided to get rid of unnecessary papers that were no longer needed. Sophia quietly entered the study, sat down on the chair opposite the desk. "I'm listening to you," Mamia said affectionately to her son. "I wanted to talk to you about this morning's conversation with your father," the woman explained her intentions. Felix immediately changed in his face. He became more gloomy and dissatisfied. His mother seemed to notice his frown and added, "Don't be so skeptical. Your father and I want what's best for you. Don't you see our efforts? Please understand your father's situation. He's dying, Felix, and he wants to make things right for you, to help you help me. Who needs help getting married? Why can't I find a girl I'll love, who'll be the right mom? My father and I wouldn't mind that. But time is running out. You won't have time to find a girl of the same faith as ours. And that's exactly what my father would want. It's very important. Son, this is the history of our family, our ancient lineage, of which we are all so proud. You must make your way with a woman of the Tao. In this, I'm afraid you have no choice. Can you imagine how many generations of our ancestors have adhered to this righteous faith? How many have suffered for it? What a long way they traveled, bringing Taoism here to Russia. We must honor and remember them, son. Accept your fate. Do not anger the spirit of our fathers. Well, if I don't want to go on, why do I have to practice this religion? Maybe I don't believe in it at all. Maybe I'm an atheist or agnostic." The guy parried the woman. The woman's heart even sank. "What are you talking about?" she said in amazement, Felix. "I do not recognize you. You want to give up our faith, which my father and I have carried through so many generations, in which we brought up and raised you our only son, our heir." "Perhaps," the son muttered. So said Sophia, changing her tone to one that the astonished son had never heard from his quiet and kind mother. "Your father didn't marry me for love either. But as you can see, he and I are very fond of each other. You're marrying this girl because those are the rules. And if you want to be part of our family, our big family," Mother added threateningly, "then you will have to accept it." With those words, the woman got up from her chair and walked towards the exit of the room. "If I really had a choice, I wouldn't have been born into your family," bitterly whispered the son. However, the woman heard it. She rolled her shoulders sorrowfully, but said nothing more. She was hurt that Felix didn't want to realize how important this was to them. They were doing so well, and this idyll would have continued until Felix became more and more understanding about the three pure to keep my husband alive, to prolong it yet let him heal from his serious illness. "I pray you." Habitually, the woman called out to her gods. All night she prayed, pored over rosary beads, cleansed her soul with them, trying to reach the divine essence. And with the first rays of sunlight, she felt much better. "Son, I have something to tell you," Sophia said at breakfast. What else did Felix say? Choking on his cereal. "Daddy's condition has worsened. He needs emergency surgery to remove part of his lungs." The woman said sadly, "We've decided we need to improve our chances of success and intend to go to Germany. They have the best clinic in Europe. Many difficult patients have been treated there. Therefore, your father and I hope for a favorable outcome and want to enlist your support." Felix listened carefully to his mother. This plan was really good in Germany, true, some of the most advanced medical technology in the whole world. However, what kind of support would they expect from him? Financially, the family was fine with money. Of course, his parents expect him, Felix, to fulfill their request and get married as soon as possible. "I take it you're still talking about the same thing?" asked the boy to his mother. "What do you think, son?" Question to question, Sophia answered. I guess I'll have to get married after all." The woman frowned, but there was a maternal tenderness in her gaze. "Yes, son. If you respect and love your father, will you do it?" "I'm right." Felix thought for a moment and nodded. He knew that he would not go against the will of his father, who was at death's door. The boy loved his father, and if for his father's peace of mind he needed to get married, he would do it. "So when will I see my bride?" the young man asked, rising from his chair. "The engagement is in 3 days. At the ceremony, the girl's father will give his traditional consent to the wedding. You will meet their family. Everything will be fine." The mother tried to cheer up her son. Of course, it didn't encourage him in any way. But Felix appreciated his mother's efforts. She really wished him happiness and hoped that he would find his love in this girl. Even if not immediately, but it would happen sooner or later. The woman looked fondly at her son. He had matured so much and become a real man. That's how she always dreamed of raising him. Sophia herself lived in poverty and was married off to just such a poor guy from the same village of her dear Harry. But they managed to make a good life, moved to the city, had a boy, and lived happily ever after. She couldn't believe that it could all come crashing down in an instant. All their dreams of growing old together could go down the drain. But life is unpredictable. Nothing lasts forever, and it's only by knowing this that we gain immortality. She believed in the Tao. Her husband believed in the Tao. They would be immortal because they knew the truth. This knowledge warmed her soul and supported her in the most difficult moments, when it seemed that nothing would pull her out of the bottom. The Tao is eternal. "We're not, son. I'm glad you listened to my will," Harry said into the receiver of the telephone. "Dad, what are the guarantees for the success of the operation?" My son changed the subject. There was silence in response. That hardly meant anything good. "In the best-case scenario, part of one of my lungs will be removed. The painful part, followed by a transplant, so I can live a normal life. I didn't want this operation, you know, but your mother insisted, and I couldn't refuse her." The son didn't answer anything. He didn't know how to support a man who was facing a very risky operation. Harry was on the verge of life and death, and those close to him could only manfully watch him suffer. Yes, to try and ease that suffering a little. "You'll be at the engagement party. Has the son finally spoken?" "Yes, as long as my condition allows it. So I won't leave you there with your mother," Harry tried to joke. The day of the engagement came. The bride's family received the dear guests. This village was called. The flight here with one layover followed by a 2-hour ride in a comfortable cab. It was long and tedious. But Harry, who'd been drugged beforehand, was doing well. The family name was Singh, and they were descended from an ancient Chinese family. Cindy, like Felix's family, had moved from China many years ago and were now documented English, but with Chinese surnames. They did not change it or translate it in any way, but left it untouched in memory of their ancestors. The girl's family was small. Parents, daughter, and son the same age as Felix. Also with them lived a grandmother, who was already well over 92 families, seated in a large outdoor gazebo. The bride's parents were poor, but very intelligent people. They themselves set a delicious meal. The table was occupied by the guests with interesting conversations. Sophia's brothels were very pleased with the future relatives. But of course, it was impossible not to notice in what poverty they lived. The wooden house was already rotten Midas in some places. It seemed that the building even swayed a little. The windows were wooden, and of course let in the cold and moisture. They didn't even have a gas supply, and the electricity was supplied with frequent interruptions. That is why candles were still used here. The main source of heat was the stove, which occupied a good half of the largest room in the house, and an old grandmother slept in a large and warm bed above the stove. It looked quite nice and eco-friendly. However, the people who lived in such conditions were deprived of something. After all, while technology was advancing, and mankind has already created computers' internet, and even came close to creating an artificial mind. In this house, they had no idea about a regular cell phone. Finally, the bride herself came to the table, dressed in a national costume of red color, with amazingly beautiful golden embroidery. That was the end of the beauty in the girl's appearance. Felix was simply shocked. He, of course, expected all sorts of things, but this. His future wife was not just ugly, she was ugly, like an ugly toad. Liquid, short hair, very narrow dark eyes, almost closed, puffy cheeks, and countless moles, more like warts all over her face. No, he clearly didn't want a wife like that. Not that Felix judged people based on appearance. However, there wouldn't even be the right words here. Subjective point of view, if you make an effort and try to be objective would despair, Felix thought. Beautiful appearance is an important factor in choosing a spouse, because otherwise we won't have beautiful children. In addition, these terrible moles, perhaps it is some kind of genetic disease. The girl, no matter how you look at it, you can only see the downside. And no matter how much the young man tried, he could not find a single plus. Maybe she was at least smart, educated. Let not be unlucky with the appearance, but the inner world of a person may be also beautiful. In despair persuaded himself Guy. However, the hopes of Felix to find in her at least something interesting faded by the minute. But still he tried happiness. And what do, honored ones? Let me know your name. With a polite smile, asked Felix Moon. The girl introduced herself. My name is Moon, dear Moon, the boy repeated with a smile. He was a little surprised at this name, because it was originally Chinese, and at the accent with which the girl pronounced it. But it seems that this Russian-Chinese family decided to follow the ancient traditions to the end. I mainly do needlework, and began the girl and hesitated. Shut up. Looked at her mother with a very strange praying look, as if she did not know what exactly to answer her. And I read a lot. I have a lot of different useful books, added with doubt in Moon's voice. What do you prefer, the classics? Or perhaps you study the works of our esteemed philosophers? Started to interrogate poor Felix with vigor. Oh, I shyly began the bride and stammered. She looked meaningfully at her mother again. This is where the bride's father stepped in, apparently in order to somehow hide the awkward pause. Well, I think the young people are now acquainted, and I give my consent to this marriage. Harry nodded solemnly, agreeing with the words of his future relative. He stood up and folded his hands in a grateful gesture, bowed to everyone and left, leaving behind a pungent floral scent. Felix felt completely disappointed. Well, what did he really expect? Now the idea of becoming the husband of this bad girl seemed terrifying to him. The girl had obviously lied to him about the books. It was obvious, because an enthusiastic person could say a lot about literature even for a couple of minutes. Of course, the option that she was shy was not excluded, but the guy was firmly convinced that this girl was fit only for a dishwasher. He didn't want a wife like that, a perfectly promising wife who would just please her husband at the thought of how exactly she would do it. He just twitched with disgust. She was ugly complexioned, clearly poorly educated. All of these were qualities that Felix certainly never wanted to see in his spouse. Damn it, let others sort out such young ladies. Inwardly flared up Guy. Obviously, many fanatics would like them, but not him. He was looking for a girl who was beautiful, free, had her own views and principles. But now he had no other choice. Only marriage. Obviously, this marriage would benefit both families. Moon's parents would use this kind of kinship to set up their own. Daughter Felix's parents would find peace and happiness for a son who married a girl of his faith. And the guy realized that he was stuck in all this up to his ears. Giving up his family was not an option, or they would have disowned him. He consoled himself only with the fact that even with all the orthodoxy of their community, so that it was empty. Divorce had never been abolished in this country. He'd have to get married. What can you do? But then he's bound to divorce her after a while. Mom, please. I don't want to marry a girl I don't love. Felix made one last attempt. When they got home, Sophia was cleaning up after dinner, and Harry was resting on the sofa, reading a book, occasionally reminding himself with a loud cough. We'll get along. Mother exhaled. She was clearly tired of these conversations. The woman understood how difficult it was for her son to take this step. Sophia remembered her husband, who also tried to escape from the wedding to the last, but in the end they got married and began to live happily. Everything in this life can be endured, she continued. You don't know what she'll be like in marriage. You shouldn't be so desperate right away. What happens if I don't marry this girl? That's out of the question. But if you decide to do that, you'll ruin our family relationship forever. You must realize that they are doing this for money. Felix pleaded. Do they want money? Yes, it's undeniable. What we need is a marriage to a pure girl of your faith. That is your father's will, and as a son, you must fulfill it. That's right, Sophia. A man in the other corner of the room chimed in. The woman finished washing the dishes, wiped her hands on a towel, and looked at her son with a smile and tenderness. Honey, I'm sure you're very wrong in your beliefs. You'll see. Your father and I have found a wonderful match for you. Felix suppressed, nodded, and left for his room. As he was about to enter the bedroom, he heard a muffled dialogue between his mother and father. He decided to cautiously eavesdrop on his parents' conversation. Opal, is this really so necessary? In a concerned voice, Sophia asked, I must, while I am alive, see my son who has acquired a wife of his faith. Yes, I may not see my grandchildren, but I will have peace of mind, knowing that my son has a worthy woman with whom he will continue our lineage. Harry replied firmly, Perhaps we were too hasty. We always wanted him to marry for love, to take his time, to find him a good match, a girl worthy of him. Did I raise him to have such an unhappy union? That's how we got together and got out of this backwater. Sophia and up. I think that our son too, if we raised him to be a real man, will be able to provide the same good life for his wife and then for his children. What if we're making a mistake? What if we're making our son a miserable Harry? I don't want him to hate us for the rest of his life. A woman cried. I understand your worries, honey, but please trust me, he'll be fine. In the following minutes, only bitter sobs of the mother were heard. And Felix didn't know that his mother was so worried about him. She really only wanted the best for him. It made him think about a lot of things. Would a mother be willing to make her own son miserable for the sake of some kind of faith? Why did they care so much about her? It should be noted that the guy had never shown much interest in Taoism. For him, any religion seemed something strange and artificial, absolutely unnecessary. People invented some gods, and each nation had their own, and everyone thought they were the only real ones. Nonsense. People need a higher mind or power to just calm themselves down and give their lives meaning. Who would want to? It's pointless to go through life knowing that at the end of it there will be nothing. Everyone, or almost everyone, has to believe in something. Otherwise, mankind is doomed. But Felix, like most young people, was sure that there is nothing divine in the world. For him, God was only science. But since he madly loved his mother, the guy from childhood pretended to believe, and for him not an empty sound performed all the rituals, observed traditions. Once they even traveled to China, to the historical homeland, to immerse themselves in Taoism, as in the Celestial Empire was the birthplace of this faith. And of course, the followers and temples there were innumerable. However, with each year of his growing up, he went more and more into science. He studied at the Faculty of Geology, helped his father with business, and began to devote less and less time to spiritual life. Of course, his mother was not happy about this development, and once even forced him into a serious conversation. You are attending our school less and less. You are rarely in the temple. You've stopped meditating and practicing. Mom, you should finally realize that I am not interested in all this. Felix interrupted the woman. What do you mean, not interested? This is your faith. I want to devote my life to science, and Taoism has no place in it. Sophia put his hand to his mouth in a tragic gesture. What the hell do you think you're doing? How dare you say such things? Your father is also not the last man in this life and a successful businessman. But that doesn't stop him from continuing on his path of following the Tao. Have you forgotten the main point of our existence on this earth? The world is full of religion, Mom, and everyone is talking about something different. But I don't think I'll ever be able to join one. It's all foreign to me. The woman sat back in her chair and shook her head. No, Felix, if you give up your faith, you give up me and your father. You will have no family. Is that what you want? So you're willing to give up your own son for your faith. It's the way of the world. We just go with the flow of life. And if you deny me, I will not resist. because resistance is a path to nowhere. Felix shook his head and left the room. He loved his mother and father very much, but at the same time he hated everything about this fucking religion. The guy thought it was moronic. After all, denying death, denying the natural course of things, denying nature itself, there would be no immortality. Our spirit will not be overpowered. It is in the soul of our children. We will simply die. There will be emptiness next. The end. However, after giving it some thought, he made a wise decision. Mom, I'm sorry for everything I said. I was wrong and I'm ready to continue to give myself to my faith, Felix declared to his mother. Smiled sincerely. She was very glad that her son understood her and stayed in the bosom of family and religion. The woman could not resist him and was insanely happy for the decision her son had made. The boy, on the other hand, was terribly disappointed that for most of his life he would have to pretend and follow the will of his parents. But he just couldn't afford to leave them. They had done so much for him, invested so much in him. Felix had an obligation to repay them by loving their faith. After all, that meant respect and gratitude for their labor. The next morning became very hard for the boy. After yesterday's obedient dialogue of his parents, he felt uncomfortable. Felix felt very awkward at breakfast, which passed in complete silence. Finally, his mother raised her voice. Felix, my father, and I have news for you. The boy immediately tensed up. It did not bode well. Usually his mother tried to prepare the others for a serious topic. As you know, my father needs surgery. She started from a distance. We thought we had more time, but unfortunately, there is no time left at all. We'll have to leave for Germany as early as tomorrow. Felix shouted. Yes, Harry spoke up. But don't act like a capricious girl and get married. The engagement has already taken place. I expect you to obey, not disgrace. Harry. Sophia turned to her husband indignantly. The woman looked at her son and smiled dearly. What your father means is that you will have to get married without us. We won't be able to attend your wedding. Felix's eyes rounded in amazement. Not only did he have no desire to get married, but his parents would not be there on this beautiful day. Anger boiled up inside him. You don't have to worry. There will be no wedding. The boy blurted out. Harry, what is it? Scylla pounded the table with his fist. Sophia flinched at her husband's reaction, and then almost cried herself. That was how much her son's statement struck her. Felix, sonny, what are you saying? Sophia said reverently, hovering her son's hands with her own little warm palms. However, Felix threw an angry glance at his mother and snatched his hands from her embrace. I don't want to marry Moon. She disgusts me. Explained his words to the boy. I don't care if you want to or not. The father gritted his teeth. You are my son, and you will obey my will. If you don't want to lose that role, fine, then you're no longer my family. I'm leaving just as rudely replied Felix. He abruptly got up from the table and went to pack his things. Felix, stop, shouted his mother after him. She was about to run after her son, but her hand was grabbed by Harry. Don't, darling. He has made his choice, and we must not interfere with it. Tears came to the mother's eyes. The woman didn't want it to turn out this way. Sophia wanted to avoid this conflict by any means necessary. But Harry had ruined it. Sophia didn't know. Whether it was the disease affecting him so negatively or his temper. Her George was a strict father. Sometimes he would say something very hurtful, but it was always the truth, and though it was hard for Sophia to admit it. But even now her husband was right. Felix had been born into their family, so he should have followed their traditions. But he's grown up now, and it's up to him to decide what he wants to do. The central idea of Taoism. Go with the flow and don't fight back. If Felix decided to go, let him go. The guy stuffed in his bag, into the car aimlessly staggered around the neighborhood and reflected on what had happened. It seemed to him that the whole world suddenly turned against him. What injustice. Was it his fault that he was born into this family? Of course not. But they provided for him, gave him a good education. No, he owes them everything. Or should he go against his parents' wishes? Alex, I can sleep over tonight, said Felix into the phone receiver. No problem. Only then buy something to chew, answered the friend. The guy complied with the friend's request and lurked with a whole bag of different food. But at least it was lunchtime. His appetite was completely absent. He could not eat when so much had come upon him. Arriving at the right address, Felix went up to the floor and rang the doorbell, which fell off after a few seconds. "Come in." Felix invited his friend in. Alex's apartment was much more modest, but he rented it completely alone. No parents, no rules, no religion. Absolute and quiet solitude. The hallway was quite small, as well as the only room in the apartment. However, everything was very cozily arranged. Felix made his way into the room and sat down on the couch. The friend whirled around the apartment, closed the door, put the kettle on. "At night you will tell me what's the matter," unceremoniously asked Alex, sitting down opposite the friend. He was not distinguished by special neatness in conversations at once spoke in essence and directly to the face. On the one hand, it was a good trait. On the other hand, sometimes very offensive. Ask him, for example, how he liked his new jacket, and he would answer honestly, "It didn't look good." That couldn't help but offend. But better the bitter truth than a sweet lie. Yes, parents are a problem. Felix answered with a sigh. He always liked to start all conversations from afar to prepare the interlocutor for the future dialogue. He had inherited this trait from his mother. They told him to move out finally, Alex suggested, trying to make a joke. Felix was silent. He didn't know how to tell his friend about his worries. He and Alex had been friends since childhood. However, their paths diverged when the guys graduated from high school. Alex went to study to be a sound engineer and devoted his life to music. He did not have the same rich parents as Felix, and he achieved everything by his own labor. Felix went to university thanks to his parents' money, because he was smart enough, but not persistent enough in achieving his goal. No one ever set a goal for him to enter on the budget. They just paid for education, and that was the end of it. However, Felix decided on his future specialty himself and studied at the university with pleasure. "My father wants me to get married," sadly muttered Felix, lowering his head. "Why so sad?" "It's great," answered Alex. Laughter. Indeed, not understanding his friend's mood, he himself had no personal life. Alex devoted himself to his career and never thought about his family. He hadn't finished university yet, but he was already earning well, as fate gave him a job in a famous studio, where quite wealthy artists and bloggers recorded their albums and podcasts. It wasn't until later that Alex got it. Felix probably didn't think about getting married either. He had a steady business. The kid obviously didn't want to settle down so quickly. Now the expression on Alex's face became sympathetic. "To whom?" "Careful," asked Alex's friend. "That's the thing," sighed Felix. "On some village girl is depressed," he added. "That poor little villagers hardly touch your heart anymore." The boy tried to cheer up his friend with his jokes. "What's that got to do with it?" Felix got angry, as if coming out of a trance. "It's not even about social status. First of all, I don't want to have a wife right now. I wanted to rise up on my own first, not sit on my parents' neck. And secondly, would a girl like that make me happy? She's uneducated, unattractive, and hardly a good hostess." "So you've already met her, Alex?" "We were already engaged," shouted Felix. "My parents decided everything for me." "I didn't know that your ancestors want to marry you to Celiana," said Alex in bewilderment. "No, they just want my wife to be a girl of their faith, and they don't care if she will be a beauty or a native smart or not." I did not mention another circumstance ignored the last question of the friend. Felix gloomed. "My father is dying." "God." Alex stretched. "I sympathize." "He wants to see me married before he dies," continued the guy, "and unfortunately, for today found only this frosting." "Wait, what was it about her you didn't like so much?" "Lack of education." "Can you teach her?" "Beauty." "Can you change that too?" "I can't." Felix thought for a moment. "I just didn't think it would be so soon. So soon I'd live to see it. I'm not done yet. I haven't done anything, achieved anything. And they're already asking me to get married and have children. And anyway, you haven't seen her, Alex. It's something. I'm telling you." The guy said all his claims out loud and suddenly amazed himself. For a long time, he didn't understand what it was that repulsed him so much. And only now came the realization all too quickly. He was only 23 years old. Everything was supposed to be ahead of him. He wished he could take as his wife a woman he truly loved, with whom they would be soulmates. He didn't care what her faith was. She could be an atheist. He just wanted true, sincere love, not a marriage that was necessary to please his father. The guy felt like a serf who was forced to marry. "Tell me, Alex, what injustice is this?" After a long silence, asked Felix. "I understand that this girl is being married not so much for you as for money." "Well, of course," confirmed Felix sadly. "So let's not despair. I'll help you. I have a good plan. Maybe it will work," Alex declared. Felix, the Novostroika, had better move closer to his friend. He wanted to hear this brilliant plan. Alex had always had a knack for getting out of situations. Once at school, they threw a desk out of the window. Alex everything. So the principal and the teacher were to blame. However, that's another story. Having listened carefully to his friend's ingenious plan, Felix realized that he would do everything Alex came up with. It seemed like a really good way out. When the young man returned home the next day, his parents were already gone. They had left. Felix felt abandoned. Did he have the right to be here at all? After all, a day ago he declared that he did not want to have anything to do with this family. The guy decided to make a call alone to his mother. The phone rang. "Mom." Felix began. "What, son?" Gently but tiredly, the woman answered. "I'm sorry for everything I said this morning. I'm very ashamed of those words. I love you and your father, and I am ready to get married," the boy declared. Felix cried out excitedly to Sophia. Sounds could be heard in the phone. "I was so worried when you didn't show up. You'll have to forgive your father's rudeness." He did. By the way, as he interrupted the woman's son, "He's supposed to have surgery in 5 days. We're running some tests now." Okay. There was an awkward silence. Sophia was the first to break it. "Felix, we never got a chance to talk about the wedding because we're running out of time. We decided to have it in a week. As we said, my father and I will be absent, but morally we will be with you." "I understand. We are kind of indifferent," replied the son. He wasn't really interested in the details. His plan was a little different. They talked a little more about each other's well-being and said goodbye. Now Felix had to wait for the wedding day. The guy did not prepare for it at all. Unlike the bride, who was picking out jewelry and trying out her hair, her relatives were in charge of organizing the event. However, Felix's parents helped them financially. Felix himself continued to do business. He studied, and everything in his life flowed as it was before. Finally, the time of the appointed rite came. All this week, the guy felt terrible, conflicting emotions, but still took a plane ticket and flew to the event. He turned off his phone a couple days before the flight because he was mad at his father and did not want to listen to his last instructions. The wedding, as well as the engagement, took place in the same remote from civilization, sparsely populated village. To be more exact, near it there were endless fields, renewed with forest, where there was a temple Datsun, in which the marriage was to take place. The temple was small, but beautiful enough. A great many people came to the ceremony, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's parents didn't have that many friends or relatives, because those parents were either dead or had simply cut off all ties with their wealthy urban distant kin long ago. When Harry and Sophia had moved into town and started their own business, many of the distant relatives and friends had become jealous of them, and all communication with them had ceased, in and of itself. Felix drove up to the ceremony venue in a dirty old Shiguli. He managed with great difficulty to find such an ill-finished car and borrow it for one day from the local crew. Some guests were simply shocked at such an appearance. Though no, they weren't only astonished by it. When the guy entered the temple, a lot of surprised looks turned to him. All those present immediately began to whisper. Such a commotion was caused by the young man's appearance. After all, he clearly followed the plan made by Alex. The groom, contrary to the expectations of those gathered, came to the ceremony in the outfit of a bum. He wore a pink, torn, dirty t-shirt and beach shorts. The same kind of all this image was covered by a wrinkled blue jacket with red hearts, which was that he moved. He's wearing a lot of holy white sneakers, or rather, they'd been white once. The hair on his head was gathered into a short, sloppy ponytail. He bought the whole outfit at a flea market the day before his wedding. The guy had purposely chosen the lamest and weirdest clothes. It was very difficult. And the sellers looked at the foreign buyer with surprised eyes. How such a solid man who came to the market in a branded suit can buy such a thing? But all this was done for the sake of this very day, for the indignant looks, the guests, and their dissatisfied whispers. Some did not even hide their obvious displeasure at the appearance of the groom. Demonstrably, they got up and left the ceremony. One man even ventured to ask what this strange boy forgot in such a sacred place, to which Felix cheerfully answered him that he had come to get married. All this performance I watched inwardly laughing. Alex, the man who was the creator of this ingenious plan. When almost all the guests sat down and began to look at the groom with eyes full of anger and disappointment, the guy came forward and said, "Dear guests, I understand your angry looks, but the explanation for my appearance is very, very simple. My parents have gone bankrupt." Loud cheers started, heated discussions on the sidelines, and lively whispering. Among the guests, Felix looked victoriously at Alex. At last, this story was over. Yes, most likely, his parents will never forgive him for such a disgrace. But now he will really be free. But then suddenly the doors of the temple opened, and the chorus sang some unearthly, angelic melody. The boy grinned at his bride, who was approaching him with her father's arm around her. Though she was covered by a traditional cape, she could surely see her fiancé's stunning outfit. Her accompanying father was simply enraged, but still continued to walk his daughter down the aisle. Probably he really needed the money, and they were willing to tolerate any attitude of the guy. But how could they sell their own daughter so horribly? Is she not dear to them at all? Thought even with some regret for the poor girl Felix. When they reached the priest, the father lowered his daughter's hand. Felix could not see her face, but suspected that she was horrified at what was happening. Finally, astonished as much as anyone, the priest took his religious paraphernalia, muttered something, and gestured Felix permission to throw back the bride's cloak. What did the boy do? Jesus, what was revealed to him? His impertinence. The milk instantly disappeared from his face, and an expression of utter shock and amazement froze on it. Right at him with pure, clear eyes, with eyes of incredible beauty, eyes in which you could drown forever and never regret it. A completely different girl was looking at him. Yes, it was not the dopey girl he had seen at his engagement party. This bride was simply enchanting. Beautiful brown curls fell over her graceful shoulders. Long, thick black lashes covered bright, glowing hazel eyes that shone from within. Her skin was snow white, thin and clear, like precious porcelain, and flawlessly pure. And those lips of theirs wanted to kiss Felix immediately, as if lightning had struck. He fell in love up to his ears and irrevocably. The guy never believed in love at first sight. After all, it meant that a person falls in love with the cover, not the content itself. But what he felt differently now was simply impossible to describe. And this most marvelous, most enchanting angelic face looked at him, a little frowning, frightened, sad eyes wounded Olenek. Only then did the boy suddenly realize how he now looked. God, like a circus performer. He felt very, very ashamed. In general, he could never even imagine that at the same time you can feel so many contradictory feelings. Felix felt so sorry for the girl who saw all this circus. He felt sorry for himself, pity for his unhappy parents. He was terribly angry now at Alex. Whoever had come up with this stupid performance was angry with himself. Why had he agreed to it? He realized with horror that he had no idea. What's this beautiful girl like now? She was almost sold under the pretext of the true faith, so even the groom turned out to be a complete idiot. And now she's definitely disgraced. The guy wanted to fall through the ground immediately. But on the other hand, did he know that there would be such a strange switch? Felix simply did not understand how it happened. His brain refused to work. Or was it the artificial makeup that had changed the girl so unrecognizably? Did he take another look at her? No, not at all. That's definitely not Moon. Where's Moon? Felix finally wondered aloud and looked at the girl's father. The one, it seems completely, and without two, lived the disgrace to which their entire family had just been subjected. To give his daughter in marriage to some crazy clown. Absolutely no respect for their faith. The father of the bride is just depressed. Silent turned a completely different color, and the mother answered instead. That is what Moon is. The young man hissed, and she, looking angrily at Felix, she was just skewered with anger. And if it hadn't been for the crowd of guests, she would have pounced on the bastard right now and smashed his face all over her bloody face. Are you saying I'm blind? It's definitely not Moon. The guy who didn't care who said or thought anything anymore was indignant. From anger, the girl's father clenched his fists and was about to hit this insolent man. But he was stopped by his wife. With a gesture, the man clenched his jaws and held back, and the woman clearly and without emotion said, "The one you saw, fool," was a common substitute. Did your parents not teach you our traditions? All the great gods know this. The groom must not see the bride before the wedding. At the engagement ceremony, they always show the switch, usually the worst girl they can find, so that the evil spirits will not envy the young people and spoil their wedding. But apparently, in your case, they still managed to do it. This is our present. Beautiful, smart, beloved, and our only daughter is the hope of the family and the hope of our whole community. The boy was simply stunned by the information he had just received. His mouth opened on its own, and his mind could not cope with the shock. He looked at the bride once more. It couldn't be. Wouldn't his parents have told him about this fact? Well, okay, his father, but his mother, she could have at least given him a hint of what to prepare for. But if he knew that the bride would be fake at the engagement party, and even on purpose, the worst part would have been easier for him to reconcile with his future fate. You really are their daughter. Decided to clarify the guy involuntarily guilty of this confusion. The girl only nodded, lowering her eyes modestly. It seems that her parents brought her up in the most rigid traditions. Realizing that not all is not yet lost, and the real Mon intended for him as a wife really unearthly. A beauty, the one he had just fallen madly in love with. Felix decided to come to his senses and get married after all. Of course, he was still completely unaware of what kind of person his future wife, but now he was completely indifferent. He only wanted her to be his wife as soon as possible. May I have your attention, please? He loudly announced to everyone present at this ceremony, despite our family circumstances. I am ready to keep my word and marry Moon. An unimaginable rumble rose in the hall again. Now everyone was discussing the groom's decision. Wasn't he planning to get married? Then why had they come here? What kind of circus was this today in such a holy place? You may continue. The boy turned to the priest, but he was gone. Where did he go? The boy wondered. What did he want at such a crucial moment? And just when Felix wanted to go to sort out the mess and find the escaped minister of heaven, he reappeared. You're having some kind of a jamboree instead of a sacred ceremony? I'm getting out of here right now. Besides, I just got a call from your worthless parents. Your father's on the mend. And they are breaking off this engagement with anger, the priest, who had taken off his ceremonial robes, declared. He jabbed his finger into Felix's chest. He muttered something unintelligible and ostentatiously left the temple, followed by all the others. Soon the hall was almost empty. The boy looked at the priest in total confusion, then looked at the girl and her parents. He had just found the love of his life, and everything was falling apart like a house of cards. It really was like a circus, and a bad one at that. Felix looked at his friend, hoping to get support, but he just shrugged his shoulders and made a perplexed face. This twist of fate was definitely not part of their beautiful plan. Well, come here. We're leaving, ordered the father of the bride. He did not look so strict at the engagement party, Felix noted to himself. The girl obediently turned and was about to follow her parents. But then Felix grabbed her arm. Looking directly into the eyes of the head of the family, the guy said decisively, "No, she is not going anywhere. I am the lawful groom, and my word is this. The wedding will take place today. Do you want it or not?" Young man, laughed the man. I don't understand you at all. I don't understand your whole family either. First, you come to a sacred ceremony dressed as a clown, insulting our faith and our clan. Claiming your family is bankrupt and showing complete disregard for everything we hold dear. Then your father calls, says nothing of the ruin, but breaks off the engagement. And now you're back to claiming my daughter and threatening me. The engagement has been consummated, so you agree. Without blinking an eye, Felix parried. I will marry her, and that's final. It's your own fault, isn't it? You gave me some stupid switch. Don't you all realize that our generation doesn't care about all these religious prejudices? Of course, it wouldn't have been a circus if I'd seen the real one, but now I insist I have a legal right to your daughter. You practically sold her to me. What do you say? Not like this? How dare you, you bastard? The man hissed and hit Felix in the face with all his might. From a strong blow, the guy fell down and dropped his hand to his soulmate from his nose. He bled under the eye, blurred a large black eye. Yes, Alman cried out to the wife of the father of the family. Looks like they call everyone in their family by their Chinese names. Or is that some kind of switch too? Despite the pitch, Felix grinned to himself. He stood up, wiped the blood from his face with his sleeve, and returned the insufferable scoundrel's favor. The woman screamed, the daughter stood like a statue in her finery, and the few men present tried to break up the fight, but they were unsuccessful. Finally, Alex and another massive young local managed to do so, and they pulled the frustrated groom and father-in-law apart. What are you doing? Fool, spoke Alex quietly. Pardon God, not particles, cried out, ran back the priest, who heard the noise of fighting in the temple. To do such a thing in a holy place. You'll never attain enlightenment. You'll never know the path. Go away from here and never come back. And he spat under Felix's feet. He took the rosary and began to mutter something to himself quickly, apparently cursing the whole family of evil and his fiancée. Felix looked around. Only he and Alex were left in the temple room. The bride's family had disappeared as well. While the priest was covering him, Felix, shamed, all the guests had left as well. He had really messed up and had only himself to blame for everything. Yes, that was their cunning plan at first, to come in such a slovenly, unacceptable state, to say he couldn't see anything because his parents were broke. But things didn't go according to plan. When Felix saw his bride, he fell in love. There was no doubt about it. But now the relationship with her parents is ruined forever, as is the relationship with their priest. Plus the whole congregation, all the people who came. These are solemnizing events. Very disappointed and now unlikely to come to his wedding again. And will she even be in it? Felix was very doubtful. However, he was firmly convinced of one thing at all costs. Moon would be his wife. He was ready to steal her, kill for her, do anything to make her his. A murderous expression froze on Du Amin's round face. He had indeed wished someone dead so dishonored his daughter, his family, his religion. Who would take this tainted commodity as a wife now? And where else would he find another suitable groom? No, this Samsung and his family will not get away with this. They may be rich. They may have the right connections. But Amin has honor and dignity and his faith. And he will defend his daughter's honorable name and spare his family from such a terrible disgrace. The father resolutely dragged his late, quiet daughter behind him, who looked around with innocent eyes wet with tears. The mother walked beside them, showering curses on the rich and worthless family. As they left the temple, Felix rushed after them. Felix, stop. What are you doing again? Shouted after him Alex, trying to catch up with his friend. So they almost caught up with the remote. Yes, hearing their rapid stomping behind their backs, angrily turned around and his eyes blazed frantic. Fury, let's back off. We need to talk, Felix told him. The man told his family to wait for him here. They moved far enough away closer to the junction Felix had rented. Alex was also on alert to control the situation. If things go the same scenario as they did at the temple, what else do you want to talk about? Boyfriend? Amin asked sternly. You know very well what I want to marry your daughter, and I will do anything to get her. Well, can I congratulate you? You have already done everything so that my daughter herself will never come near you again. Do you really think she could marry the man who raised his hand against her father? The boy was ashamed. claiming Amin's daughter and beating him in front of everyone in the temple. He may have started it first, but let's face it, Felix fully deserved that slap. And if you think about it in their religion, it's not enough to kill for. Felix realized that his plan had failed and he had made a terrible mistake. Yes, Amin, I understand your indignation. But the guy started to apologize, but he was rudely interrupted. But do you really have any excuse for your behavior? The man started yelling. I didn't mean for it to come out this way. Please understand, you have deceived me. But the betrothed was a completely different girl, and you've already been explained well enough by the underdog. Why is that? Besides, you are utterly unworthy of mine. You don't know what duty is and love, only the beauty of a man's outer shell. The whole point of our engagement is to see the inner beauty. But you won't understand why I'm trying. Felix shook his head in frustration. He wanted to just take it off his shoulders and shake it properly to put it in order. God, how much nonsense could he take today? Inner beauty? Is he serious? How can you see the inner beauty of one person in another? Yeah, but when did I have time to see the inner beauty? Moon, if I haven't even seen her once restrain himself as calmly as possible, he said to his opponent. According to your very logical tradition, I should see her rich spiritual world in another. That tradition, as you put it, is also yours. Whether you like it or not, Father Moon objected. If you remember, your parents raised you in the tradition. Dao caustically remarked to Da Amun. True, as I see it, they didn't succeed in that, he added. With bitterness. My parents forced me to get married. I didn't want to. I don't practice any Taoism. I'm a future scientist, and I don't care about all religion combined, exclaimed young Felix with all the fervor of a young man. The man felt so offended that his eyes almost fell out of his orbits. He looked at the impertinent boy and gritted his teeth, threatening him with his finger. You will never be my son-in-law. I will not allow it. You and your family disgust me. You broke our family and paid for it. I will never give you my daughter. Goodbye. With those words, the man turned and walked towards his family, leaving the two young men in a complete stupor. I don't get it now. He just said he wouldn't give me his daughter. Felix said slowly, What did he want, buddy? Alex was amazed. This is not a toy. And not always everything turns out the way we want. Disappointedly added the friend and went towards the car. Felix silently looked after him. He has not yet fully recovered from everything that happened today, and he was already offended by his friend, so he caught up with him and stopped him. Sanik, what are you doing? Surprised asked the groom. The friend looked at him disappointed. And you really do not understand? No, bro, explain. You think that because you were born into a rich family, you are allowed everything. Rich parents solve all your problems. You're used to getting everything you want. But you know, I can disappoint you. The world doesn't revolve around you. Shouted Alex. I've never heard you say that before, Alex. That's crazy, Felix. Are you jealous of me? Jealous of what, Felix? What you didn't get. It's the unwilling beauty, or that you insulted her father, beat him, and then you question and sincerely do not understand why he does not want to give you his daughter in marriage. You've got a lot of nerve, Felix. Not only have you shown no respect for your parents' request, but you think that after everything you've done here, you're going to be of any use to anyone. Wait a minute, you're the one blaming me for things that aren't my fault. I wanted to make fun of people like that, and I didn't beat up my father. I was only trying to help you, and you were a complete idiot. You came up with the plan, asshole. You helped me pay it off, and now you're renegotiating liability. That plan certainly didn't include fighting and insulting your fiancé's parents. Yeah, you want to know why it went so wrong. Felix raised his voice even higher. I fell in love with her as soon as I saw her. Yeah, Sonia, I fell in love with that girl. You're out of your mind. What love? Damien said it right. You just want a pretty doll. Love. Felix is a job, not one lustful look at a scared girl. She could be Angelina Jolie. But that's not love. Fool. Fuck you. You're not my friend anymore. Felix has declared. I don't want to be friends with shit like you and Felix. I hope we never cross paths again. Goodbye. And Alex left too, this got in place. This day was supposed to be the happiest day of Felix's life, but it was the exact opposite. Now he hated this day himself and his parents. That Danfield and that stupid temple. Why? Why didn't they tell him? For the 100th time? He asked himself, as if mocking him. More torrential rain came down. Felix cursed the whole world. Why did he have to suffer such a universal injustice? He had been abandoned by all the friends of the bride's parents for sure and his parents. Judging by the 15 missed calls, the guy didn't want to answer at all. They would now be heaping accusations, swearing and sending the same curses as the priest and Father Moon, even though they themselves had a hand in the whole shebang. To announce that they had changed their minds when the son was already holding his Narayan's hand. What nonsense is this? Did they really think in hindsight that this was how they were saving him? Felix kicked a huge stone with his foot in terrible frustration and howled in pain. The beautiful face, the real Moonwoo, flashed before his eyes again. He would always remember that look of confusion and interest. He sat down and his near Magoo, picked up on the road, walked far ahead. Alex told him not to turn on the fool and at least get back with him together. The next day, they flew safely to their hometown and went in different directions for the whole way back, once chatty as 40. Alex didn't utter half a word. Felix sat on his soul as well. His parents had called so many times that he just turned his phone off. Maybe they had already arrived. However, entering the apartment, he realized that this was not the case. There was no one at home. Everything remained in the same place. And only at your without watering flowers reminded reproachfully of his tender mother. He'd forgotten to leave his neighbor the keys. How is Mom there? She must be terribly worried. Felix dared to call her and find out the details of his and his father's motivation that had led to such monstrous consequences. Yes, answered his mother's sleepy voice. It's you, Felix. Great gods, where have you been? Sorry, Mom, apologized the boy. I saw that you called me many times, but I couldn't answer. The mother tried to say something, but Felix interrupted her mom. The priest interrupted the wedding after you called. Tell me, why did your father do that? Your father is on the mend and no longer wants to marry you to that beggar girl. Now we have time again, and we can find you a better bride. No, Mom, the son replied firmly. That's not the way things are done. You forced me to get married, and then suddenly you decide to end it all. You're playing on other people's feelings. Imagine how your parents felt. They couldn't bear the embarrassment. You become too concerned with their feelings. Son, the mother said grudgingly. 2 days ago, you didn't even want to get married. Things have changed. Mom is Moon. She should be mine. Oh, son, how can I trust you young men after that? I'm not getting married today. Tomorrow, the love of my life. So you'll do as your father says. Now, obviously, you're too young to decide for yourself, right? Okay, let's talk about it later. But Mom, well, she's already hung up on Felix. For the umpteenth time in the past few days, he felt disappointed in his once respected parents. He was really hurt that his mother didn't understand him. Not even because she and his father had conditioned him and almost threatened him. He just stopped understanding anything about their motives and their actions. They talked him so hard into getting married, and now they didn't want him to. The hell of it. The guy flopped down on the couch and covered his face with his hands. He didn't understand what to do next, how to live. His friend had turned away from him. His family is against him, and his fiancée's parents don't want to know him anymore. Felix incessantly thought about how he could reunite with his beloved, once again apologize, get on his knees and beg for forgiveness. That was unlikely to fly. Try talking to Moon herself. That's a good idea. At the ceremony, Felix thought she looked at him with interest. But then again, she probably looked at everyone that way. But he had to be sure. Suddenly, the girl will reciprocate his feelings. But how to put this plan into action? After all, if he comes to their house through the front door, so to speak, he will obviously not be particularly welcome. But Felix decided to take a chance. The airline should already include me in the list of VIP clients. With a smirk, thought he ordered another ticket, but already painfully familiar flight. Now it was necessary to prepare properly for the meeting with his beloved. The guy rushed to the shopping center, bought himself a new soup basket, delicacies, sweets, and expensive perfume for men, and various other pleasant little things. Now there were only flowers left. He didn't go to his network. He didn't want his parents to know about his movements. It would be another round of annoying phone calls. Why? 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 Oh, what a nightmare. Father's will is our family religion, the way of the Tao. Damn it. He's had enough. You want bouquets of rainbow roses for all this? Smiling politely, the girl at the flower shop asked. Yes, that's right. Felix answered cheerfully. Rainbow ones were considered the most beautiful, rare, and prestigious. Felix hoped that Moon would appreciate the gift. The cashier pulled out a card machine. Applying, please, she said, adjusting the flowers in the bouquet. The guy applied the card, but an unpleasant squeak followed. The girl looked at him questioningly. It didn't work. There must be some mistake. Let's try again, she suggested. She pressed some buttons on the machine. Felix applied the card again, and again there was that awful beeping sound. The clerk looked at the terminal, then at the guy. It looks like your card is not working, the girl said. No way. I used it a couple minutes ago at the candy store. It worked. The young man protested. Young man, I don't know what happened to your card, but you better check it out. We're hosting, no problems. I just served a customer, and everything went well, muttered the disgruntled saleswoman, putting the bouquet of roses back in the glass display case. The guy could not understand why it happened. After all, only a few minutes ago, and then it came to him. He'd had his accounts frozen, and it was none other than his own father. That's how he showed his love for his own. One son, Felix started frantically dialing his mother's number. He says he had no desire to talk to his father. But unfortunately, it was the father who answered the phone. That Daddy's money had run out, Harry quipped. He'd frozen the accounts for something. In a calm tone, without giving in to provocation, Felix asked, Aren't you getting cocky, son? So you think you can just not answer the phone and spend all my money? It was only when I decided to block the card that you finally bothered to call. Your money is my money too. Wasn't I working for the greater good? And the whole time you were in the hospital, I was the one working day and night for our business. Felix walked out of the flower store so as not to embarrass the cashier, who was already starting to get frightened by his loud talking and was looking at him with a concerned look. Dear Felix, none of this is our business. It is mine alone, my father declared. I am very grateful to you for choosing to support me in a difficult situation. But I'm on the mend, which means I don't need your help anymore. Then why do you need it at all? I yelled in rage at the guy. To endlessly manipulate me like an obedient puppet. You are my son and heir. Yes, perhaps. Right now, you're too young to realize how life works. But the time will come when you will understand and change your mind. In the meantime, it's my duty as a father to guide and restrain your irrational impulses. Well, the father put Felix at the end of this discussion, realizing that it will not achieve anything and need to act more cunningly. I am ready to obey you. I see you're talking better. Your cough is almost gone. Did the operation help you? The boy asked me affectionately. Yes, son, thank the doctor. Harry said, but don't think that's how you're going to put me off my guard. Listen to me carefully. You will not go near that family again under any circumstances. Do you understand? If you listen to me, we're all in big trouble. It's not about me or our religion anymore. You have foolishly insulted your father and his entire family. He won't let it go. I take it you two have known each other a long time. Careful, asked Felix. He has been my friend since childhood, answered the father. That's why I wanted you to marry his little girl. But then Harry paused. Circumstances have changed. I'm better now, and we don't need to rush into a wedding. We'll look for another good match for you later, like you wanted. But I love this girl. Felix cried out in despair. You don't even know her. Father said calmly, and that's the end of it. And my card? The boy tried to make a last attempt. But his father, as well as his mother, before that without further words gave the rebuff. Felix understood very well that now that he was left without funds, it would be much harder for him to carry out his plan to conquer Moon. But despair is not the style of a hot young man. He threw himself into searching drawers, closets, and closet. An hour later, he had already racked up $10.50. Knowing his father's habit of stashing things everywhere, Harry had forgotten that Felix was like him in terms of business qualities. So if he could get out of the situation with a blocked account, he thought feverishly, it would be enough for the first time. At least he had time to buy a ticket. After he cashed in the money from his stock exchange transactions, there should also be some money saved up. With all the determination of a lover, Felix quickly packed his travel bag, hailed a cab, and rushed to the airport. He intended to find and persuade her to run away with him. The fact that the girl might not be willing to give up everything for him, he didn't take it into account. When the next day he was again on the same loop, among the age-old cottonwood cedars, the roads were already thickening with the quick autumn twilight. This time Felix rented a sturdy and roomy SUV, and with much more comfort overcame the disgusting highway to the village itself. He braked in some thick bushes and hid the Jeep in them, driving almost into the bush and already on foot, and lightly began to sneak roundabout to the house of the parents of his adored Moon. Now the sun had almost set from behind the tops of the tall trees. Only the faintest of flowers were visible, and the sunset in the sky revealed itself in all its grandeur. Suddenly, as soon as he stepped out into the open, a truly futuristic and disturbing picture unfolded, retiring into the open. The sun was just a huge, bright scarlet color, and Felix rubbed his eyes in amazement, trying to make sure that this landscape he was seeing for real. It seemed to be drowning in the murky or a few spun in the distance above the dark band of distant forest of their clouds and looked. So fading away a bright corner and higher up on the vast, never to be seen. In the big city, heavenly expanse evict mountains of blue and golden clouds. They spit fractions at each other, breaking and melting like a giant kaleidoscope. Changing the inimitable surreal action over and over again on the guy's heart became unsettling. Even creepy. It suddenly seemed to him that here is not that familiar land, not that planet, which he considers his own, but an unknown and threatening world, where you should not go without special need. Felix, as mesmerized, stood for a few minutes, gazing into the frightening sky, and then shook his head of fear and obsession, and resolutely strode into the village. All he took with him was a small backpack that contained a bottle of water, a folding knife, a flashlight, a bag of chips. The hike took longer than the guy had anticipated. He walked to the right house for about 20 minutes. The village was much bigger than he had first thought. Felix moved cautiously. Every now and then, looking around, he feared to meet Ammon or someone else from his clan who could bring him news. Some of the huts looked like dilapidated ruins, while others were quite respectable buildings. There were hardly any people to be seen. There were no electric lights on the streets either. Soon he would probably need a flashlight to make out the road in the increasingly thickening net. Felix passed the village almost through. Already some sort of wide field was visible, and the round roof of the Datsun, where the recent failed ceremony had taken place. The boy realized that he was lost. He knocked randomly at 6. At the first wicket, Philly prepared to wait for a long time for the owner to come out to ask for directions, and he was immediately sent away by surprise. When a short figure behind the hedge rose almost from the ground and said hoarsely, "What do you want, honored one? Can you tell me which way the house is?" He asked the frowning grandfather, who looked at the stranger with obvious dislike. "What do you need him for?" grumbled the grandfather. "I need to deliver a package to him." Felix lied, pointing to his backpack. The old man looked at the young man incredulously, raised his eyebrows, as if amazed at his idiocy, and silently pointed with his hand to the right to the end of the press in the forest dead end, and then go left. "They live on the very outskirts." Felix thanked the old man and turned around. It was to go on, but he was stopped again by a fiddling old man's voice. "I wouldn't go to them if I were you, especially now." The grandfather snapped. "Yes, thank you," Felix mumbled softly and hurried away. If he could have seen what the old man did afterwards, he wouldn't have been so optimistic. He opened a cigarette, threw it on the ground, and shouted something harsh in his own language. From the hut jumped out a boy of about 9 years old, narrow-eyed on the rocks in a tracksuit, and having listened to Didov's admonitions about the rightness, rushed in the same direction as the stranger dead Archil who had left, fierce in his face. He shook his head disapprovingly, and his eyes gleamed in the moonlight with an almost bestial eerie fire. But Felix neither saw nor knew any of this. And after 10 minutes of quick hell found himself at a familiar house collapsed, standing and dark. Not a single window glowed in the night, and our hero huffed. Everyone was already asleep, or no one was home, he decided. But he needed this girl. He wanted to make her his wife by all means, which meant trying everything, all options. He pushed the dilapidated gate, and it opened easily with an unpleasant creak to slip into the yard. Felix tried the same thing with the door of the house, and again it was unlocked. With a sinking heart, he squeezed inside and listened. There was a sepulchral silence. Carefully, he fumbled for a flashlight in his pocket and turned it on without taking it out. The resulting dim light showed him that the first floor was empty and unoccupied. The furnace was cold, and no sign of the owner's presence. Felix hesitated for a moment, walked the same way to the second floor, stopping at every creak and rustle. But even here he found nothing new. The house looked as if no one had lived here for a long time. The disappointed lover walked back into the courtyard and immediately stopped like a stumbling block. In the brightly lit warm electric light, the window of the neighboring mansion, Moon's profile clearly emerged. The guy, like a moth with eyes burning with passion, began to circle the yard, looking for a way to get to the cherished window. The opportunity was found in a couple of minutes. Seeing Kynes, the net separating neighboring plots in one place tore, forming a large gash river, regardless of the damage to his expensive clothes. Felix squeezed through this uneven hole and found himself in the well-maintained, well-lighted garden street lamps of someone else's yard. Noticing some movement nearby, he immediately ducked into the bushes, trying to recognize the paying heart, and almost laughed out loud when a big fat cat walked past him importantly. The cat went on a night hunt, smiled the guy, and slowly got out of hiding like a thief, making his way almost to the ground. He took the yard to the cherished window. And here it is, the goal is already close. On the second floor of the mansion, the beautiful Moon brushed her dark curls. Sitting by a large Triumph, Felix watched her like a maniac from behind the lush rose bushes for his luck. A little to the right of Moon's window, some low outbuilding was visible. It wasn't too hard to climb to the roof, just as long as there were no dogs here. Felix prayed to himself. Further along the wall was a rather rugged-looking Liang village with thick, sturdy chain-link victories for one, then another. The boy, surprisingly, climbed up quite easily. The girl at the mirror heard a strange sound, became alert, and turned her head toward the window, which was open for airing. Felix froze, frightened by her sudden movement, but immediately realized that there was no point in hiding. After all, he had come to talk to her, and this was his chance. Pulled up a little more, he knocked quietly on the window. The girl picked up some object from the table, slipped it into a pocket in her homemade pajamas. God, she looked so seductive in them, and walked cautiously to the window. Moon said timidly to the boy, "Open up, please. Don't be afraid. It's me, Felix, your fiancé." Her face changed. From worried, it became cheerful and lively, and Felix thought it was a good sign. "Hello," he said, her ridiculously smiling all over her mouth. The girl quietly jumped in her fist. It was too anecdotal a sight. Clinging still to the escapes, the shadows, and Shock's wife, absent-mindedly in an expensive suit, drooled, looking at her like a hungry puppy at a bowl of food. "What wind brought you here?" Moon grinned, eyeing her bow. The boy heard her voice for the first time. It rang like a crystal bell. He had one of those. He had gotten it for New Year's Eve as a child and treasured it terribly then. "I've come for you. I want you to run away with me," Felix declared. The girl laughed ringingly and even clapped her hands. "Bravo, bravo. I haven't been so amused in a long time." She wiped the corners of her prominent eyes with the back of her pink palm. She couldn't help laughing. "You made me cry," she told him at last. "That's bad." Disarming, smiled Felix. Smiled beautifully, but completely useless. Why? Raising his eyebrows in a house, upset Felix, like a child whose toy has been taken away. A sprout. Contemptuously threw it behind and poked. Are you completely retarded or just successfully pretending? But Moon tried was sluggishly expressed the guy. What? What can you say to me? She interrupted him. That you fell in love and lost your mind? Blah, 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 blah. Do you have any idea how many times I've heard that kind of nonsense? Get out, she finished her harsh tirade and was about to close the window. No, please, darling, after listening to me. Felix pleaded. Aren't we destined for each other by fate itself? After all, a couple of days ago you were going to marry me in obedience to your father's will. That was a couple days ago. I shrugged. It seemed like a favorable idea to my ancestors at the time. I've heard of marriages of convenience, but you chagrined. You put on a terrific show, failed miserably. You're definitely not a clown. If not, you need to seriously consider a circus career. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking. Felix started again, but this time she didn't let him finish. You don't have to be born. I understood everything perfectly well back then. Thank you especially for that funny show. But now my whole family hates you and your ancestors. I forgive you this time because you managed to make me laugh again. But if you stick your nose in here one more time, the girl concluded with a clear threat in her voice, you'll regret it. And you know how to push the pain. Admitted Felix and put his hand on the sash of the window so that she did not close it. And what do you hate me to? He tried to ask, looking into her eyes. I have no reason to feel any particular hatred for you. The beauty answered indifferently. You haven't done anything bad to me. On the contrary, you've cheered me up. And you've freed me from something I never wanted to do. So you didn't want to marry me, the boy summed up. Wistfully, lowering his head. One would think you were going to get married. He glared. But when I saw you, I realized I loved you. I fell in love with you. Fell in love at first sight, desperately and hurriedly uttered Felix belittlingly, looking at the object of his passion. Please, let's avoid it. I earn well and will be able to provide for you perfectly. I'll make you happy, I promise. The girl looked at him carefully. Promise? Yes, yes. Felix nodded happily, sensing a breach in her defenses. Then you must pass the test. Solemnly, Moon said. The boy was taken aback. What test? He felt involuntary anxiety again. Everything that was going on already clearly smelled of magical, scary fairy tales. Unreal landscapes, a remote village. He climbed into a tower with a beautiful woman. Like Rapunzel, and now there's some kind of challenge. I'd do anything for you. He muffled the timid signal of his common sense with a decisive phrase. Good. Moon smiled and squinted slyly. Then, no sooner had she finished this sentence than downstairs there was heard some strange sound at the trumpet growling, or grunting. It certainly did not look like a dog. But Felix counted to 3 and cautiously looked down. When he saw what was below, he felt a seizure on you. It was a tiger, a very real bloody tiger. Walking freely around the precinct like a circus arena. Moon. Nasty for giggling. Well, then let's meet my striped friend. First, don't bother, she said affectionately to Felix, who darted his eyes at her wildly, unable to say anything. I'll give you a good head start. She leaned out of the window and shouted down something like know how. Felix nervously saw that the predator raised his muzzle, looked at his mistress and poked something, like a big cat gracefully and with a gate removed. Away too, exhaled the guy, feeling the prickly goosebumps crumble from his head to his feet. Don't relax, laughed the cruel Moon. You only have about 5 minutes to 7. Run. Suddenly she shouted and poked Felix in the chest with her thin finger, sharp, long, dark red tights on the end. At that he thought her eyes glittered predatorily. But at that moment he did not have time to register it in his memory, because from the surprise he let go of the tree chute and fell down on the very edge of the roof of the annex and hit his whole body painfully. And Moon was upstairs having fun. Run, you idiot. Felix somehow got up, looked away with a poisoned gaze, and rashly rushed across the lawn to the hole. All the dacha fence from there was already completely dirty and stripped. He ran down the street, unable to feel his feet under him. He could still hear Moon's distant, hysterical, laid-back laughter. Now her voice no longer seemed to him a gentle crystal bell. So he ran for what seemed to him a very long time, until Felix, powerless in his chest, and hot and aching, squatted down and tried to get some water from his backpack. But it was better he didn't. The approaching menacing roar suddenly announced the neighborhood, and the hapless knight almost crapped his pants from fear, threw his bag and set such a catch that his institute instructor on military training would be extremely amazed if he saw now this undoubted running record. Feeling no longer in a fairy tale. To hell with such fairy tales put together. But as if on the set of a bad horror movie, Felix ran away with huge jumps, not seeing the road, and behind him inexorably catches up with a very real tiger. There were no more thoughts in the shoe's head. Only the pounding in his temples was to live. Live, please live. He himself did not know to whom exactly this desperate plea was addressed. Maybe even to the hunt, to the bald devil himself. He didn't care at all anymore. This maddening chase was stopped by the county lord, Chen know-how. The tiger stopped like a halt, yawned lazily and pinned his ears and walked, wagging his tail at that stern voice. Felix stopped too, breathing heavily, bulging his eyes and gulping hot air with his mouth. A fire was burning inside him, and he couldn't feel his legs. "Don't be afraid, he's just a little fool," said someone on the sidelines. Where Tiger went, "Come on, come here." Felix closed his eyes forcefully, squeezed his temples, and looked into the distance again, trying to focus on someone's figure looming. In the dim light of a tall lantern pole, there was something like a sign hanging on the pole to make out what was scrawled on it. But he didn't even try. But oh well, the guy thought, and got ready to run onto his car. It was true that he hadn't passed this part of the village when he was heading here. But that didn't matter at all. The main thing was to get out of this damn area and get to some safe civilization. And then he saw Mona coming toward him again. No, not the Moon who had just poisoned a wild beast on him, but the other Moon he'd seen at the engagement party? Or was she not Moon? No, definitely that Moon has a different name, I guess. What's the difference? Felix's thoughts were racing, and confused, his hands were shaking, and his mouth was dry. He approached. With regret and even slight contempt, looked at the guy. "Come with me," decisively she said, and pulled him by the sleeve. "Where to? Why?" Still not having fully recovered his breath, Felix tried to object. "This way." She dragged him to the door under the lantern and slammed it shut in front of him. The room behind the door turned out to be something like an inn. There was loud modern music from the bartender, or as he was called here, wiping glasses with a not-so-clean towel. A few people were drinking at low wooden tables. A small group was playing backgammon. When they piled inside, no one even looked up. The girl confidently turned into some dark corridor and signaled Felix to follow her. However, he decided to be stubborn and find out what other adventure they were trying to pull him into. "Where are you taking me?" he said more sensibly. She turned around, frowned slightly, gave him an appraising look from head to toe, and grinned at the tiger. "Or do you want to go back to keep competing with him in the running?" No, he hastened to assure her and obediently dragged her up another of the same creaking pile of wooden stairs. It looked a little better than that, though, as she staggered under his weight in her parents' abandoned house and found herself in a small room that looked a lot like a hotel room. Felix looked around. Yes, it clearly looked like a hotel. The girl who had saved him from the tiger nudged him casually through the door of the tiny bathroom. "Clean yourself up. I'll be right back." She stepped out and appeared to lock the door. But Felix was glad of that now. Anything was better than being rushed in the dark by a horrible monster ready to devour you. He shuddered again at the memory of his recent mortal danger. He showered with pleasure, screaming and turning under the hot jets. Name wiped himself with a clean towel, and finding a bathrobe here and there, threw it on. He had nothing else to wear. What had recently been an expensive Italian tracksuit was now a pitiful rags. When he went back into the room, he found that Moon had already returned with a large tray of food. The boy himself didn't realize exactly what he had eaten, but it was surprisingly delicious. Satiated, he finally got a chance to get a proper look at his savior. Of course, she was far from the beautiful Moon, But she wasn't at all dull either, as he'd thought she was at the engagement party. The ugly warts were gone. Her face was smooth, her skin even, and her eyes were no longer like narrow slits. I think the eyes were actually quite nice. "What are you?" "Ridiculous," he asked her. She smiled. "I'm Kate." At least one normal name in this theater of the absurd. Felix thought involuntarily and smiled back. "Thank you, Kate. You saved me from this." He twitched again, like a tiger's toothache. "Absolutely harmless," the girl assured him. "No more so than its namesake from the Winnie the Pooh cartoon, remember? It's where the tiger is always jumping on his tail and annoys everyone with his impenetrable stupidity." Felix laughed animatedly. "Yes, it's my favorite cartoon. I just adored it as a child." He smiled warmly, remembering how many cozy evenings he spent in the company of his own mother with a cup of hot cocoa, Melu, and this very cartoon. But you know, this local predator. If it hadn't been for you, a shadow would have come over his face again. "I'm telling you patiently, like a little kid," Kate Tigra explained. "The cub is still a silly little baby. He runs after everyone like a puppy. All he wants to do is play." But Moon ordered him in a disbelieving tone. Felix objected. "He's just a spoiled asshole." Kate grinned. "She laughed at you. That's all. And where is that beast now?" Cautiously inquired the boy, taking the information to heart. "Well, walking home, I guess." Kate shrugged. "Everyone knows him here, and he knows everyone. He lives in his menagerie. That's where he was born. He's as shy as a baloney, really." "I have a menagerie?" Felix asked incredulously. "They have a lot of things." Kate grinned again. "They're the local rich." And she laughed at her own joke. "But for engagements," Felix continued, puzzled. "They've just cheated you out of your engagement," the girl told him. "This is the lodge." "Where have you been?" "The old house of their 100-year-old grandmother. But even she doesn't live in it anymore. Your parents haven't been here for a long time and don't seem to realize how things are back home now." She was silent for a moment and then squinted slyly. "Do you remember me somehow?" The boy muttered unhappily. "Yes," Kate agreed, "but don't take offense. That's the way it is around here. I was asked to help. So I did." "Who asked you?" "My father. He's the owner of this inn. There wasn't another girl in the whole village as old as Moon and me." "What was all that for?" Felix asked indifferently in a tired voice. "I'm telling you, it's a custom among these fanatics not to jinx them. The bride before the wedding show a substitute, trying to choose the most horrible homeland." "I did a good job, really," said Kate with a laugh. "Yeah," Felix shook his head. "I fell for that fucking circus, and it turned out the way it did." He grudgingly blurted out. He realized a second later that it sounded very rude, but Kate didn't seem the least bit offended. "I'm sorry, I'm such a fool," the boy apologized hastily. "It's okay, I did my best to." The girl held out her hand to him. "Let's take it," she said, like a kid. Felix liked this unexpected offer. He liked it very much. "Let's." He smirked and gently shook her small, warm palm. Suddenly he felt uncomfortable, and he hurriedly removed his hand and moved the conversation to another topic. "How much is the room here?" $500 per night. "But I can give you a discount." Kate smiled. "Thank you, no need." Felix replied dryly and carelessly threw the $5,000 bills on the table. "Keep the change. Leave a tip. That's how it is for the city's rich," Kate said resentfully and muffled. "Thank you," she smiled politely and looked at him with an overly formal smile. "Breakfast is from 8 to 11, and you can choose and pay at the cashier's desk." She headed for the door. "If you need anything, please contact the receptionist." Slammed the door and walked out, throwing the key on the table. Now Felix was truly ashamed. You could say, his life was saved, and he other things. However, fatigue took over, and soon the hapless knight already slept the sleep of a baby. Cozy on fresh sheets, clean and simple bed. The morning met Felix with such bright sunlight that he, barely opening his eyes, immediately closed them. Appeared, but the next minute he laughed joyfully, jumped out of bed, and went to the bathroom to shine. Properly, he got out thoroughly. Satisfied, he looked himself over in the mirror and winked at his mirror double. thought that life wasn't as bad as it had seemed to him on last night's sullen evening. The beginning of the day left no chance to almost mystical horror, which haunted the guy the day before. Now to himself, everything that had happened seemed to him only a funny joke, nothing more. Why was he so afraid of that tiger cub? It was embarrassing. Now the cute image in front of Moon's face resurfaced in his memory. Here she is looking in the mirror, brushing her gorgeous curls. Here she is smiling, looking into his eyes. Here's an infectious chuckle informing him of the ordeal. But why? Why is he such an impenetrable fool? Determined to try his luck again today, Felix came out of the bathroom, and then he suddenly realized an obvious but unpleasant truth. He had nothing to wear. Yesterday's fashionable outfit was in the trash. He would die prematurely, first from the collision with the net, and then from the nightmare chase. The guy frowned and lingered. But at least the robe was in place. Leaving it behind, he strode proudly down the stairs, completely unaware of what time it might be now. Your phone charger was left in the car, and there was no clock in the room. Reaching the front desk, the bar, he found Kate there, busily writing something down in the big journal. When she saw him, she made a serious and impenetrable face and asked him if he needed anything. Breakfast is still an hour away. Kate, please don't be angry. Don't be angry. He corrected himself when he met her aloof gaze. I wasn't myself last night. I said some nonsense and didn't even thank you for your help. I'm ashamed, aren't I? He folded his hands in a pleading gesture and looked at the girl with the most night eyes he could muster. Okay, accepted. Her gaze softened. She smiled and was herself again. Come on, Kate. I'll look for some clothes for you. Before Felix could reply half a word, she had already gone somewhere and returned, carrying a neat package. I think this will do. The guy thanked his savior and, clutching the handout to his chest, went upstairs. It turned out to be no big deal. A t-shirt 2 sizes bigger than it needed to be, and clearly not 1 year's wear, and 3 books. But there was no need to choose. Felix hadn't brought any spare outerwear. Pulled on his duffel, our hero went downstairs again. He involuntarily admired. Now she was joyfully humming, rubbing, and to the mirror shine all around and twirled. Like Cinderella sweeping the floor with a tall brush. Felix, she did not notice at once, and for a minute or two he stood on the stairs, smiling and looking at her slender figure, which in the bright morning light, penetrating through 2 large windows, seemed almost transparent and fragile. Like a dandelion, fluffy, short hair sparkling in the sunlight, flashed golden sparks, and a simple brown dress seemed the outfit of a princess. When she finally saw that she was being watched, she was embarrassed for a few seconds, lowered her head, and ran off with her mop loudly. Felix walked over to the counter, trying to look serious, but his lips kept stretching into a cheerful smile of their own. Waiting for her to return, he said, Kate, you were dancing like Cinderella just now. You're doing great, she smiled and looked at him trustingly and easily. Only now in the bright daylight that strips away all the masks from people, he noticed that her whole face was studded with little redheads, freckles, and even her deep brown eyes, all in pretty, bright, certain dots. It was so unexpected and so cute that Felix suddenly thought that she was just as good as Mona. However, he immediately chased that thought away from him. Can I invite you to breakfast? He asked Kate, wanting to repay her for last night's favor. Would I? The girl agreed. I've already eaten, but I'd love to have coffee with you. What time does she get up? Felix thought. Stepping behind her into the room where breakfast was served for food, which turned out to be both hearty and delicious. They chatted merrily, joking around, and walked back to the counter. At the entrance, completely satisfied with each other. Well, I'll go, said goodbye to the girl Felix, taking his bag from the room. I'll try my luck again. Are you going to Moon more seriously? Kate asked. Yes, he nodded. I'm still hoping she'll change her mind and marry me. Oh well, good luck to you. Kate said dryly and leaned over her magazine. Felix came out looking like a morning flake and moved with a quick step towards the Moon house. If he could see what Kate was doing now, he would probably be very surprised. She was still sitting there with her head down on her hands and her thin shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Dear Amin, I love your daughter with all my soul. I sincerely apologize to you, to your entire family, to your gods, if I may." Felix stood at the open door of the house, and for a good 10 minutes he had already been ranting in front of its head. And behind his back, but satisfied, Amin felt sluggishly and looked at the impudent man with less disapproval. Finally, with a gesture, ordered the boy to shut up the guy. "If you really have such a crush on my moon, you'll have to prove your loyalty to us." "I'm willing to do anything you say," Felix exclaimed enthusiastically. "However, do not lose sight of the immediate neighborhood. Kate said they have a whole menagerie here." "Then come here tonight." Amin nodded satisfactorily. "Once you pass the test, you'll be able to get a wife. Unless, of course, you don't ask," as yesterday, with a clear grin, the man added. "But everyone now get out of here. I haven't even had breakfast yet, and I have to listen to you. I'm sick of your speeches." He waved his hand again, which was apparently meant to mean, "The audience is over." "What time did you turn around?" asked the pushy boy. "What time should I be there when the sun comes up?" shrugged Emin. "Don't you know that evening comes just when the daylight retires?" And he grunted as he closed the door. Felix hurried away before the tiger appeared again, though he was assured that this animal was as tame and docile as a house cat. But he did not want to meet it again. He was encouraged by an almost peaceful conversation and a business proposal of his future father-in-law. The lad walked briskly back to the hotel. "It's all right. If I could stay with you for a while longer," he asked Kate. She just shrugged. "We have plenty of rooms available. It's not tourist season. Besides, you left a substantial deposit." Felix got his key back and went to retrieve the rented Jeep from the thicket. This time he drove through the village with a breeze, and no tigers were no longer afraid of him. He spent the rest of the day on pins and needles and could not wait for the evening. He ate twice, had a few drinks for courage, and even played a game of backgammon with two of the regulars. The sun was still not going down, and yet the day was steadily drawing to a close. And now the long-awaited twilight. As if waiting for this very moment, the phone rang shrilly in the hall. It was picked up by a middle-aged lady who was now sitting behind the counter instead of Kate. "Who do you want? Sounds like it's for you." She handed the receiver to Felix, wondering who could be calling him here. He put it to his ear and heard his mother's concerned voice. "Felix, thank God. Listen to me. I have something very important to tell you." She began to speak as hurriedly as if she were being chased. "Son, please wait there for me, and don't you hear me? Don't you go anywhere out of this hotel." Your father's phone clicked, and the connection went dead. Shrugging his shoulders, Felix pressed the lever and picked up his backpack, which he had found this morning on the side of the road. There they go again. Disliked, the guy thought grudgingly. How annoying. Coming out of the hotel door, he almost head-on collided with Katya. "Where did you go again at night?" she asked him glumly. "It's a long explanation." He waved her away impatiently. "Let's do it later. Please be careful." She touched his hand and looked carefully into his eyes. "If you're going for the money again." "Bye, Kate." He twisted away and walked away to his car with a quick step, irritated at the thought that this was where she was teaching him the same thing. "And you're the one who went out on the phone and looked indifferent. We didn't forget." "Well, wait here until everyone gathers." With these words, he slammed the wicket right in front of the guy's nose and lazily fell over. Wandered down the powerful path to the house. Where should he wait? Who should he wait for? No one was in a hurry to answer these questions. They stomped around for a while. Felix sat back in the car and waited. What else could he do? About an hour passed. The guy had already managed to doze off comfortably on the seat, as suddenly there was a knock on the glass. When he woke up, he saw in the darkness some dark silhouettes in long clothes. There were quite a few of them, and they were moving towards the abandoned house. Rubbing at his eyes, Felix climbed out of the Jeep and headed after them. No one had invited him personally, but it was clear that they had knocked on his door for a reason. He approached the chattering on the violin rule hinges to the door, just as the last dark figure disappeared behind it. The house was the same. At least Callie's eye, but it didn't seem to confuse anyone present. As Felix looked more closely, the darkness thickened further near the stove, and he almost shrieked when he realized that every one of those who had entered the house was peering through the printing hole. He, too, stood at the end of this peculiar queue and did the same thing as the others, bent his head threefold, pulled up his legs, and suddenly fell down. Fortunately, the fall was not far, and he landed on something soft and bouncy. Here below, the darkness parted a little, and a dim light rose ahead. One by one, the balaclaved, standing, and figures stretched in that direction, followed them and Felix. They walked for probably 15 minutes down a long, damp, and narrow corridor, more like a burrow. At first, the walls were just an earthy press of some kind of communist sediment. Water slammed under their feet, and something stank nastily. Then the water disappeared. There was a little more light, and the young man's eyes, accustomed to the semi-darkness of the dungeon, could distinguish a small square room paved with thick stone slabs. All the people present were crowded here. Suddenly, there was a loud clap, and as if on cue, bright torches lit up in everyone's hands. It was quite impressive. Felix even got teary-eyed. Offense to him, torches no one for some reason did not give out. However, resentment did not last long. With a terrible creaking sound, they dissolved. The tall and double doors were clearly visible now, and forged thick iron hood and the whole private company fell out into a huge hall. Quite a place. Felix whistled, looking around. He had only ever seen such interiors in horror movies about bloodthirsty vampires and creepy Satanists. The perfectly round hall was a kind of arena. There were rough wooden benches all around. Torches were burning on the stone walls, and the high vaults were lost in the semi-darkness. Suddenly something swept before his eyes with a sharp whistle and frosted to the floor. But after a second, he realized that it was the most ordinary bat and nervously grinned. In general, there was nothing else noteworthy around the circumference of the hall, except thick curtains and cobwebs. In the center, however, there was something to see. On a small elevation similar to the foreground stood some sort of wide stone table, and on it Felix grew cold when he got a good look at a long, dark, irregularly shaped object. It was undoubtedly a coffin. Some of those who had come seated themselves on benches, while others went to the dais and stood on either side of the stone table, from whence came a sharp dissonance of drumming, and the rest of the company threw back their broad hoods. It made little difference, though, for their faces were black masks, hiding both eyes and noses, and only bright scarlet predatory mouths were fixed in unkind grimaces. Felix suddenly felt sick. He remembered where he had seen recently the same disturbing bright scarlet color of the sun. The same setting sun he had seen on the first evening of his arrival had been exactly the same color. What on earth is going on here? The boy thought, and various not very pleasant thoughts popped into his head. Sounds like they've got a real cult going on here. What if they want to kill him? But Felix immediately chased away his silly fears. It was enough that he'd already embarrassed himself yesterday. He didn't want to give these people, including Emin, a reason to doubt his courage. Greetings, initiates. While he was agonizing, something changed in the hall. Standing closest to the pew, a figure removed her mask. She appeared to be a terribly ancient old woman. Immediately slow, sloppy gray hair, in which Felix recognized, yes, of course, almost 100-year-old grandmother. Only now she no longer looked absent and insane, but looked quite meaningful, strong eyes. "We are glad that you have joined our conclave," she pronounced, stretching forward her thin, wrinkled, empty hand and pointing Kryachkov's finger directly at Felix. The deadline would come soon. Having made this exhaustive statement, Granny calmed down and sat down a little further away from everyone else. "Come closer." Felix called him again someone else's female voice. He approached its owner under a black cloak, and this woman had the same as her lips, a blood-scarlet dress. "You're called here by the gods," began with the tone of the stranger. And Felix involuntarily wrinkled again. "They are for the old." How many times, honestly, like in kindergarten? Here he slightly lost the thread of her tragic narrative, occasionally distinguishing only separate phrases such as the age-old war, the great sacrifice of the night, bloody moons, and other such nonsense. However, after listening for a while, he was surprised to note that this speech did not mention anything about the immortal teachings of Tao. And in this great night of vengeance, we will finally be able to restore justice and allow our ancestors to become immortal in the flesh. Suddenly, a woman howled at the highest note, and everyone present picked up on it. Your Felix frowned. It can't be said that all this regular circus frightened him so much. Lately, he'd somehow papa with the fact that his life now resembled more like a lowbrow adventure movie. But when the stranger shafted his dress, took him by the arm, and led him to the coffin itself, at that moment, a lad really realized that he was in serious trouble. In the coffin around which these fanatics were crowded lay a man almost naked and undoubtedly still alive. His chest, feverishly heaving arms and legs were overloaded with strong leather straps, and his face was covered with scarlet. The cloaked men began to chant something long, eerie, swaying from side to side. And Felix somehow had a long, slightly withdrawn knife in his hand. A terrifying melody soared upward to the invisible vault of the cave, and was immediately cut short by a swift movement of the hand. The scarlet priestess ripped the bandage from her victim's face. Felix's legs shook, his breath caught, and icy goosebumps ran through his body, and before him lay his own father. "It can't be," he muttered seemingly aloud, and was suddenly terribly angry. How long would all this nonsense go on? "Kill him," sharply shouted the woman's shafted dress. "Kill him, and reunite forever with your beloved. You and Mun will become the new heirs to a great dynasty, and your firstborn will become the great Dark Emperor." "Why are you talking to Darth Vader himself?" Felix asked, clutching his knife tightly in his hand. "What did he say?" the woman said. "I said that you are all stupid idiots," Felix informed her, unceremoniously grabbed her from behind by her long dark hair and presented the knife to her throat. "Now, gentleman porthole, or whatever you are," he commanded, shocked by this turn of events and a bunch of fanatics. "Do the inhabitants immediately my father, or do I cut to hell your voodoo doll?" A slender figure stepped forward and removed his mask. Felix was no longer particularly surprised to see Moon in front of him. Her face was hardly what anyone would call beautiful now. Distorted with rage, it was scary, like a witch's. "Let my mother go at once," she screamed. "Otherwise there will be no wedding." "It's okay. I'll get over it somehow," the guy replied nonchalantly, "and fucked his mom good and proper." Moon pushed at her hair and tried to jerk away, but Felix held the sharp blades tighter against her throat. "Stand still," he commanded, and turned to the frozen crowd. "Who's in charge here? Does it untie my father? Or do I not speak for myself? Will you regret it?" hissed someone from behind. The guy, who had been practicing martial arts for a long time, had a great reaction. He moved sharply to the left, dragging the hostage behind him, and thus dodging the thin dagger that was a few centimeters away from him. As he looked back, he realized he had been swiped by a 100-year-old broadsword. He pressed the blade with his foot and slid down the stone whip. He moved farther away with it. The bastard bellowed something from his cloak, and Ammon's voice. And the father-in-law showed up. Felix rejoiced. "Come on, coward, take off your mask. What do you think you're doing? Now I'll swat you. Are you tired of his masks?" The big guy roared and pulled off his mask and rushed forward. "Nada," shook his head Felix, and pressed the blade to his victim's throat. She stiffened and wildly bulged her eyes. "Yes, Amin, please untie my father. Or else I will stab her. I swear on my mother's life," Felix said threateningly, "and I'll get nothing for it. But you'll all go away for a long time. Let him go," Ammon ordered, clenching his teeth in impotent anger. Some of the squares rushed to carry out the order. A moment later, Harry emerged from the coffin, staggering. In one black window dressing, he was gagged and pushed in the back. With an unfaithful limp and gait, he moved toward his son. "What now?" Felix thought feverishly. "How do we get out of here?" "Let the priest go," Ammon shouted in the meantime. Felix smiled and decided to go to the bank. "I have a live grenade in my pocket. Now me and my father will go to the exit, and you will sit here quietly until we leave the room. Or am I going to give you a little fireworks display or not?" Suddenly he changed his demands. Give us the counselor. I'm sure you've got more than one way out here. I'm right. The capes looked at each other and mumbled something in their incomprehensible language. Suddenly, they're all moving forward together toward Felix. And more the circle closed. The executioner's sleeves, flung up each, had the same metal dagger gleaming in his hand. Felix clutched his blade convulsively and almost squeezed it into his mother's throat. He's scary at this point. A trumpeting roar came from the opposite side of the circular hall, and from nowhere a huge tiger leaped across the rows of long benches to the dais, followed by Kate. In person. Stop, she shouted. Stop all this at once. She was holding a real machine gun. She was followed into the room by 3 more men armed with the same flaming arrows. Felix looked at her happily and smiled broadly at Kate. It's about time, he exclaimed. And you brought the tiger cub with you. What a good girl, without listening to his incoherent mumbling. A tall man, in whom Felix recognized Kate's father, stepped forward. Everyone remove your masks and lay down your weapons. This is a detention. Get down on the floor and put your hands behind your back. Says who? He shouted at Eamon, who tried to hide his dagger in his sleeve. Now you can command Kate to Tiger, and he was 1 jump away from the fanatics lying on the floor. While the men were knitting the peacefully lying adherents, Tiger walked beside them growling menacingly, and if anyone tried to move even a little bit and nervously beat on the sides of his long striped tail, that's the matter. Felix said approvingly, nudging Mother Moon toward everyone else. Thank you, Kate. This is the 2nd time you've saved my life. He turned to the girl and looked at her tenderly. You're an Amazon, honestly. The light of the hot torches reflected in his rapturous dark eyes, which made them seem even more beautiful to Kate than they really were. Let's get out of here. She gestured for the boy to follow her. Dad, you can go now. Felix hugged his father's trembling shoulders and took off his t-shirt. Here, let's go for a toss. Shocked man could barely utter his son and cried. It's not far here. Kate looked sympathetically at Harry. There's an ambulance and the emergency services. Can they help you now? They took a completely different route to the exit, a much shorter path than the one Felix had taken with the others. This path was just a narrow one, shot into the rock without any frills, and it went sharply upward after 5 minutes of walking. Crumbled underfoot. Felix's father could barely stand on his feet, and the guy had to carry him on his back and, in this manner, bent in 3 figures. Throw some upstairs, in the narrow space between the responsible steel plates. But within 10 minutes they were on the surface. Here really stood an ambulance, blindingly shining beacon, and a large car of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. And there were some uniformed men crowding the police. Harry was immediately put on a stretcher, covered with a warm blanket, and taken to a place where he would receive qualified help. Felix refused such an offer. Then the emergency workers gave him a thick jacket, and he did not refuse it. After all, it was mid-September and nights in these parts are already quite cool. With a bare torso will not walk for a long time. One by one, the members of the sect with their hands tied behind them were brought out. The last one to come out was a huge tiger from Blue, twitching its tail at Mao. Kate approached the predator and stroked it affectionately on its large, stretched head. The big cat came a race to the girl and rather mediocre. You said his name was Tiger, Felix noticed, and reached out to pet the tiger too. In an instant, the tender cat turned into an enraged monster. A huge maw, bared, glistening white fangs. What's the matter with you, boy? Frightened, yanked his hand away. And Kate laughed merrily. It's not a tiger. Can't you see that? It's a full-grown tigress. I don't know about them, the boy muttered grudgingly. You have one in every courtyard here. He tried to make a joke, feeling his head ringing and his eyes blurring. Let's go home. Kate pulled him by the arm. Give me the keys. Do you know how to drive? Surprised. Felix was, but he waved it off. Why do I ask? You're an amazing. I'm flattered by the compliment. The girl gleamed her eyes, merrily climbed into the driver's seat, started the car, and so sharply sank from the place that from under the wheels of the SUV, with a whistle through a whole pile of rocks and sand. In front of Felix put a small glass almost to the brim, filled with some murky liquid. What is it? Distrustfully looked the guy medication. Unperturbedly wagged an eyebrow Kate's father. Or are you not a man? Pretentiously, he frowned. Such a statement angered Felix. He took the glass and knocked it down in one gulp. His eyes immediately almost popped out of his eye sockets, and everything inside burned with liquid flame. The guy coughed and tried to breathe, but it was no good. The people in the city are weak. The man shook his head. But it'll do for the first time. But boy, let's get acquainted. I'm David, Kate's dad, the owner of this joint. Here a new acquaintance grinned his joke and part-time operative of the District Department of Internal Affairs. Felix could no longer be surprised by anything. After the dungeon of local fanatics, he only nodded and extended his hand to the man. Felix, a fourth-year student of the geology department of the university and part-time stockbroker. I squeezed out the naughty words. David laughed and gave him a friendly clap on the shoulder. Well done, Felix. We've been after these bastards for a few years to cover all of them at once, and even at the scene of the crime. Seeing that the guy wanted to ask something, the man shook his head and firmly said to stop asking questions. Tomorrow go to bed and rest. Daughter take our hero to his far. Kate readily stood up and wrapped her strong arms around Felix and led him up the stairs. The guy was like a dream this time in a good dream. Everything around him. After the fire potion he had taken, everything seemed beautiful to him, and his eyes closed by themselves. And when the door to the room opened, he already seemed to be asleep on the move. Kate carefully laid the guy down, covered him with a blanket, stood for a minute watching him sleep, smiled and went out. Turn off the light. Son. His mother's caressing hands, slowing him down on his head. He didn't want to wake up. He doesn't want to go to daycare. He'd rather stay home and watch Winnie the Pooh and drink cocoa. Marsh Milou. Wake up, son. Mom. Felix opened his eyes. So he wasn't dreaming. It was really his mother. Are you here? He muttered, hugging her like a good thing. The light ward of the county clinic was now quite crowded. All right, let's start from the beginning, son, Harry said in a dying tone and glanced around at those present beside his bunk, and in a chair perched his faithful wife. The son sat across from him, demanding all the explanations his father needed. There was also Kate, her father the operative, and even a friend Alex, who had flown in with Felix's mother when he learned that a friend was in mortal danger. A couple months ago, I thought I was dying a little cough, but Harry started to speak. And I really wanted you to marry a girl of our faith. I just couldn't imagine going off into the next world, leaving my son on the wrong path. But you all know very well. I won't repeat the beginning of this story. The day before your wedding, son, a terrible truth was revealed to me. One man here, Harry looked gratefully at Kate's father, and he nodded, slightly smiling at him. A very good man, Harry continued, informed me that the family had defected to the evil side. I've heard such rumors before. Harry sighed, but I couldn't believe them. Yes, Ammon had been a dear friend of mine since I was a boy. Our fathers and grandfathers were friends before he and I were even born. Harry, sadly, I was presented with irrefutable evidence. Willy-nilly, I had to admit that my domain had become a black denunciation. It's an ancient, very ancient sect of fanatics. We thought it had long since ceased to exist. However, who would have thought that this original evil has taken root again and we're in the heart of my home village? Their terrible traditions have included sacrifice for centuries. Yes, Ammon and his many kin were the last adherents of the Black Tao. They rebuilt the ancient shrines. They believed they could make themselves immortal that way. To think Harry clutched his rosary beads in his hands and mumbled some sacred words. All those gathered waited patiently. Finally, he performed the necessary ritual and continued his story. Of course, I immediately called Amen and canceled the wedding. He got terribly angry and threatened me. But I was far away, and I didn't think his threats were so dangerous. How wrong was I? He covered his face with his hands. Those monsters tricked me into a trap. They met your mom and me at the airport. She managed to get away from them, but they took me away. Yeah, Amen doesn't forgive that kind of thing. I tried to tell you, but why didn't you explain it to me right away? Felix was outraged. The day you found out about it yourself, you could have told me that you didn't have to go to the wedding. Then none of this would have happened. He stopped suddenly. He flashed a glance at Kate and fell silent. She smiled at him, blushed, and lowered her eyes. All this did not escape her father's scrutinizing gaze. But he only smiled into his mustache. "Son, I just couldn't reach you." The father waved his hands. "Your phone was always out of reach. Or you didn't pick up the phone. What could I do?" Really, Felix admitted. He remembered how angry he had been at his father, how he had not answered his calls. "But you could write me a message," he exclaimed in surprise. Son shook his head reproachfully at Harry. "Don't you know that your mother and I never trust phones with our thoughts?" "Yes, of course we do." Rolling his eyes, Felix admitted. A strange peculiarity of his parents. "And I, in turn, wanted to intercept you right outside the temple." Katie's father entered the conversation. "To stop you from marrying Moon. When I saw that you did a good job of it yourself." Then all the people gathered couldn't stand it and laughed loudly. They laughed and could not stop, remembering how proudly Felix entered the temple dressed like circus performers. "I wish we had seen it with our own eyes with Father." Wiping away laughing tears, Sophia said, No, I'm not sorry at all. It was a terrible thing to do." Harshly pronounced Harry and you, Felix. "You'll have to try hard to redeem yourself before the gods on another dark autumn evening." The whole friendly company gathered at Kate's inn. The merry revelry went on late into the night. At some point, Felix improved the moment and whispered to Kate, "Let's go for a walk. It has become too stuffy here." The girl gladly agreed. They went outside and leisurely shaved towards the wine meadow, which Felix saw a few days ago. A stunning sunset. It was quite dark now, and only the silvery light of the eternal moon illuminated the surroundings a little. Fast and carried in the dark sky, and the air was fresh and clear, as it is only in early warm fall, Kate. Felix took the girl's hand. "I've been meaning to ask you." "Yes." She tilted her head and looked at him expectantly. "Will you marry me?" Felix waited tensely for her answer, but she did not hurry with him, slyly staring somewhere in the distance. "I don't know," she said. Finally, smiling slyly, "Will you be able to meet all the strict requirements that my father set for my future husband? Way to give and all that." Felix raised his eyebrows in amazement. "You mean him too?" Kate couldn't stand it and laughed loudly. "Oh, you're no good." Felix pretended to be angry, and then he embraced her. The laughter immediately stopped, and even the moon shamefully hid behind the clouds. "Don't you dare interfere with two lovers. And if your father does not approve of our marriage?" Quietly, she asked at last. "Then I'll remind him of the trouble we're all in." His previous decision, the boy smiled. "Going down a path can be terribly unpleasant at times, can't it?" "I'm serious about you," Kate said resentfully. "And I am serious," Felix answered firmly. "I've had enough of all this. From now on, I will choose my own path. I choose you first." The couple embraced again, and sitting under a large pine tree, looked for a long time at the velvet sky, where someone had lit large, bright stars.
Subscribe and click the bell.
This wave was bigger than all the previous ones. The sea seemed to have created it by the hands of an evil water deity, who had molded it from all the previous waves that had hit the ship. Andrew looked at the almost black wall of water mesmerized, and no longer thought about whether he would survive this blow of the elements. He couldn't accept his bitter fate at all, because it was far away. It seemed, at times, that his relatives were left in another life altogether. His wife Kate remained. Actually, for the sake of his wife, Andrew decided to take this adventure. But at first, by the way, it seemed to him that everything would be fine. That this is no adventure, but just an opportunity for a working man to make more money to provide, to support his family. What's wrong with that? But as Andrew now found out, on his own skin in some cases, the consequences can be much more terrible than you can assume or even see in a nightmare. The wave for a moment hovered once more over Kim with the camp vessel, as if a predator on the highway before him were prey. Finally, with a crashing and heavy crashing of the sea element came crashing down. Andrew closed his eyes and gripped his hands more tightly to the side. To think of it, Until a few hours ago, he had cursed the handcuffs with snot in his wrist from the vicious ship. Now he was even glad. Hoped they would keep the wave from dragging him overboard. Either way, his lips moved. "I'll come back to you." And then he was swallowed up by both the water and the cold. Placing a ceramic mold with Armenians' forbidden chicken legs on the table, Kate threw a glance at the whole still life for dinner and smiled contentedly. Just perfect. Everything just the way her husband liked it. Mashed potatoes on the side, sauerkraut, and lots of fried fish. And for dessert, apple pie. A heady aroma floated in the kitchen. Kate took off her apron and carefully straightened it, hanging it on a hook on the wall by the sink. "What's the matter? Is your lover running late?" "No, it's the new car." It demanded the owner's attention, of course, but not enough to miss the first dinner together after he got home. Sighing, Kate decided that she would have to go and get Andrew in person, and perhaps even have a talk with him. Of course, this was probably not the best time to bring up such a difficult, painful topic. Kate's mother insisted that it was better to behave as usual and not to show her illness in any way. Only Kate thought that there should be no secrets from her relatives. And all the more there was no point in pretending that she was all right, that she was the same as she had been before. After all, thought the young woman fumbling with her hands in the closet. If one loves one's other half, then illness is no reason to stop loving, right? I wanted to believe that. So it's better to tell him. Because he's gonna notice how weird she's acting. He's gonna realize something's wrong with her at any moment, and he better be prepared for it. Kate is blind, scooting her hand along the wall in search of the light switch. But despite the flash device, she still couldn't see in the bases where all sorts of little things dropped the keys to the front door. The young woman exhaled through her teeth. How on earth do we let ourselves feel helpless? The accident had happened 2 months ago when Andrew was still on watch. Kate was just coming home from work that day. She was just walking down the path through the yard outside her house when suddenly there was a sharp clap underfoot and then a flash before her eyes and her face burned with pain. An ambulance was called. Unequal passersby. The doctors said it was a miracle Kate wasn't blinded. But the firecracker, which inexplicably, as it turned out thrown in the yard in mid-March, seriously damaged the retina and lens. And Kate was lucky twice. The first time by chance. The second time with the fact that on the advice of a Maria colleague, their desks were next to each other in the accounting department. She took out health insurance with Stork. Thanks to the insurance, she was treated in a private clinic, underwent a microsurgery and a dozen specific procedures, but still her eyesight returned slowly. Wearing contact lenses was contraindicated, and glasses didn't help much. The doctors said that the body would slowly recover on its own. Probably according to statistics. In the meantime, Kate saw everything as behind the fog and glass. At first, everything was absolutely terrible, but slowly she began to adapt and even return to everyday household chores, which, however, required much more time and care. And help was often needed. For example, Kate was now unable to see how much the kitchen scales were showing. Naturally, she had to take a sick leave from work, but she was lucky with her boss and with the team. The first paid a sudden bonus on a flat spot, the second discounted the money and flooded Kate with offers of various kinds of help. But the only thing Kate really wanted at that time was that none of her friends should blab to her husband. Andrew worked as a construction worker on a shift across half the country. He was a whole specialist and earned a lot of money. And Kate didn't want him to be nervous for her, and even less to go off and come back, breaking the contract. After all, what could have happened to her? She was already recovering. In general, thinking about her near future, Kate could not imagine any other option, except that she was recovering and without any operations. And at night she was sometimes tormented by nightmares, and it was always a dream in which she saw that she was asleep. And when she awakened them, she found that she was completely blind, and at the same time she was being attacked out of the darkness by some monsters from which she now had no chance to escape. Kate didn't know. She just couldn't know that about the same time she had been in trouble, Andrew had been in trouble, too, though of a different sort. It was that one of the workers on the site was stealing materials. The customer started an internal investigation, and it turned out that Andrew was under suspicion. The contractor company knew him as an honest, decent man, but hinted boldly that they wanted to break contact with him because they did not want to have in their team a man whose guilt was not proven, but the suspicion was not removed from him at all. Andrew was shocked, offended to the core. He was so offended. He had counted so much on making more money. He had taken a new car on credit before he went on a shift, and he had taken a cash loan in the winter when the whole family went to a sanatorium for New Year's Eve. Repairs in the apartment where my wife and mother-in-law lived made his parents, who lived in the village. Helped again, right? In general, money was needed now, as they say urgently. Andrew was getting sick. He could only imagine how he would show up on his wife's doorstep and waved his hands, saying, "There is no money, and I don't know what we will do now." Andrew didn't drink. 100 years already tried it in a couple of youth. My brother made me try Andrew. I didn't like it, but now all of a sudden he wanted a drink. He went into the first Beliashi and took himself a shot glass and a snack and stood by the plastic table and gloomily looked out the window, where the first spring rain was pouring down. Yes, life can be rattling and tossing. A familiar voice sounded near him. "May I?" The unfamiliar man asked, nodding at the vacant half of Andrew's table. And at that moment, the worker who had lost his seat didn't even think about the fact that it was strange to join him a little when there were still empty historians. Andrew shrugged his shoulders. The stranger also had a ticket to him, not alcohol tea. This stranger looked quite decent. For a while, they were just silent. Eating Beliashi, the bastards kicked them out of the place. Andrew couldn't stand it and shared his pain. In the XSI century, I think I will soon go home with a full pocket. And how did it turn out? And he took it all out and told it like it was. That the bastards kicked him out for nothing. They said it wasn't their fault, but they have a reputation. So what do we do now? They said they'd give me my paycheck later. So what do I do? I'm ashamed to ask my former coworkers for a ride home. And to call home. You could die of shame. And how to look your wife in the eye. My mother-in-law would eat it alive. Everyone never liked him. I mean, her daughter could have found a better man. Yes, I sympathize. The stranger shook his head and then held out his hand. "Charles, can we have one for introductions?" Andrew nodded. After the first drink, there was a pleasant warmth in his chest, and his thoughts began to weave together as if they were unraveling a tangled mess. Charles said it happens. Not him first, not him last. But it was his own fault. I should have chosen a firm that is responsible for each worker, that values the worker as if they were members of one big family. Where can I find such a firm? Bitter. Andrew grinned. Yes, you can. Charles looked at him very carefully. Then he said that Andrew could see that he was a good man and that his story had touched him. He himself was such a man who worked honest labor for a penny and did everything to provide for his wife and 4 children. And also a disabled grandmother. A dog is also disabled. And then kind people told me that there is a job where you can earn as much in a month as in 3. I bought 2 apartments then, I told in a confidential tone. And the teenager, by the way, did not forget to drink vodka for his wife's fur coat. The whole family vacationed in the Maldives, and then he opened a business. And what? What kind of work is that? Andrew said, "You're kidding, it's not serious." On a fishing boat. And he started talking again. And then all of a sudden, Andrew found himself in front of the contracts. Charles is completely out of the territory, saying there's only 1 vacancy left on the crew. The work is serious. He wanted to give it to an acquaintance, because he is a kind of intermediary, but Vlad sees that Andrew is needed more, so go ahead and sign, man. You'll be at sea in a few days, and you'll get an advance, but I don't have time to think about it. The crew's already formed. Come on. Andrew seemed to be dozing. He almost dropped his pen when he wrote his signature where Andrew showed it. And before that he had answered in the affirmative that he had a passport. He had applied for it to take his wife and mother-in-law to Turkey. It just didn't work out. Grigoriev said that's good. It means that all the documents will be processed very quickly. You look a little woozy. Where are you staying? Said Charles. Andrew named a hotel on the outskirts, where he had rented the cheapest room since he left the construction site. Charles drove him there by car and told him to wake up and sober up, because tomorrow they will go to the office of the company, which owns the ship. They will file the documents, because it is necessary to formalize everything correctly, because the voyage is far away. But Andrew couldn't sleep for a long time. He felt nauseous and was beating himself up. He clicked the remote control of the TV, used to fall asleep to his voice at home. It was showing international news. The slave trade in the modern world had already exceeded the scale of what it was in the ancient world. The presenter of some program was broadcasting the tricks of criminals, who entice their victims into the network of criminal traffic, are becoming more and more original. Andrew didn't finish listening. What else was being said? He was not interested in the tragic problems of the world because he suddenly felt so lucky. He had met a kind person. He now had a new job, and he had a premonition that now his life would begin to be completely different. Descending from the 4th floor of a 5-story building, Kate stood at the entrance for a few minutes, gathering her courage to go outside, to go out since she had lost her sight. Normal was a little scary. She had been offered, by the way, to borrow a guide dog for a while, but Kate didn't want one. What does it do to her that it might somehow mystically affect her recovery? That she'd sort of recognize herself as disabled and it would stay that way. The only thing she was talked into doing was putting 3 points away. But right now, she left it in her room. I can handle it, she said aloud and blinked a lot, though it didn't make her feel much better. Walked along the side of the house. To get to the garages, she had to go around it and down the stairs. She'd make it through and everything would be fine. She would be now. There's her husband, her favorite, back. In fact, they weren't expecting Andrew so soon. In fact, lately it seemed to Kate that there was something wrong with her husband. The thing was that the last time they called, Andrew said that he had some trouble at work, but he wouldn't go into details. They called very rarely. Andrew asked her not to call more often, so he wouldn't miss her even more. But the last time, Kate couldn't reach him at all, and she was beginning to worry. But then suddenly her mom came home and her husband with her. Surprise, said Lisa and Kate. Like a little child to whom Santa Claus came, rushed into the hallway, but immediately froze. How would he take her illness? Or maybe Mom had already told him everything. "I've missed you, my love," the man said, and Kate thought his voice sounded like a stranger's. Probably, she decided. He was just in shock at what had happened to her, and she also thought that he didn't seem to know anything about her sick condition yet. That, she thought, was for the best. Andrew. She threw herself around his neck, hugged him, ran her nose into his cheek. Face unpleasant, stinging, stubble. Of course, my dear husband got so excited that he forgot to shave. And usually he was always clean-shaven. That's enough. You'll have time for a hug. Lisa said sternly. Let the man from the road rest. Yes, of course, Kate lost her eyes from tears. The joy of it protected them burning. And she left hurriedly to her room. I had to use the drops prescribed by the doctor. Her husband and her mother were talking quietly in the hallway. Then Mom came into the room. Daughter, I need to talk to you. Yeah, I'll put the tea on, Kate answered. He'll make it himself. Lisa didn't let her in. We need to have a serious talk. Sit down. It turned out that Lisa had some news about her daughter's husband, and she thought it was her job to deliver it. First of all, she said Andrew was only in town for a couple days and then back. Secondly, Lisa gave her daughter some feminine advice not to be in a hurry to dump her problems on her husband and not to get close to him at all. Because now she is very sick, and it will inevitably affect her. And in general, he will now then perceive her as a sick person who needs care and support, but not a woman. And if they have something in this state, the husband will have specific impressions, and he will cease to perceive her then as necessary. In general, it's better for them to sleep separately for the time being. I told him in the hall pastel joyfully Lisa. Mommy, but we were Kate at first, but Lisa came at her again with her lecture, and in the end Kate gave in. She was wary of what her husband would perceive of her mutilation, however temporary. Afterwards, the family had dinner. Then the man said he was tired and needed a rest from the road. and Kate cried alone in bed that night. And for some reason it was very, very upsetting. The next morning she woke up with a smile and a stubborn hope for the best. Everything will be fine, for sure. The main thing was to think positively. Getting out of bed, Kate not only washed her face, but also slightly tinted her lips with gloss. Let her not be able to make up as before, because blind a little less than a mole, have accumulated a carcass of female attractiveness herself to add it to her. Then she made breakfast, just cheese sandwiches and coffee. But she cut her own bread from the cheese with a knife and didn't cut it. What's not an accomplishment? Yes, thought Kate. How so? Turns out a lot of things in life. So the little everyday things that we don't lose yet are able to make them taken for granted. Things that are always available as a matter of course. At breakfast, naturally, you wanted to talk more. You just asked Kate for her husband because his voice sounded as strange today as it did before. Hoarse and rough. Yeah, sure, he must really need time, Kate thought. Because Andrew had been sitting beside her normally, but now took a seat closer to her mother-in-law. I have a doctor's appointment today. Masha promised to pick me up, Kate said. Actually, she was sure that Andrew would offer to drive her in their new car. It would be an excuse to be alone, by the way. No, Kate wasn't attracted to her mother's company. Well, maybe just a little bit. Because sometimes it was very difficult to come to an understanding. But she just really wanted to be alone with her beloved, to explore her fears and doubts. Get his words, tenderness, and support. And I need to visit someone I know. Hastily blurted out the man opposite. All right, snicker. Kate's good mood disappeared, as if a dot ran into the sun. Finished with breakfast, Kate began to pack. Maria had already called her and warned her that she would be pulling up in 5 minutes. It's great to come visit you, her friend said. When Kate went up to the apartment. Hey, Andrew, she shouted into the back of the apartment. Andrew went into the far room. He's not himself to blame, Kate said. It happens to them men. So let today be our girl's day. Maria was generally a positive person. She and Kate left the apartment together, then from the entrance got into the car carefully. Steps warned Maria at the porch of the clinic. I'm not blind, muttered Kate, but deep down I was grateful for such reverent support, which I am not. No husband, no mother received. The doctor, after a long examination, reported that the condition of the eyes is improving. But it is important to take medication in a timely manner, and it probably makes sense to think about laser vision correction surgery, which is recommended, among other things, to prevent the development of coma and other eye diseases in years in old age. But this, of course, insurance will not cover, the doctor said. I'm afraid we don't have that kind of money and won't have it. Sorry, but we're saving for a mortgage, Kate sighed. It's your personal choice, of course, but it's my duty to inform you. After the clinic, Maria insisted they stop for coffee and cake. The premiere was sluggish, laughed Kate, when her best friend set her treat. With the sick only so winked Kate. But you can pay the bill by satisfying my curiosity. So how does Andrew feel about all this? How does he feel about his job? Yeah, we've barely spoken at all since this morning. Kate shrugged. He talks to my mom more. But I believe, that he'll take things more or less normally. Only Kate stammered and sighed and set aside the spoonful of chocolate brownie. He's like a stranger. In what way? It's hard to explain. There's just a different voice coming back, a different smell. You're probably just worried sick, Maria said sympathetically, and Kate agreed. Really, she said, you shouldn't make up things for yourself that aren't there. Here was her beloved husband back home, albeit for a short time, and then he would have to go back. But what should she be sad about today, if just the day before yesterday, it seems, she was ready to give a lot in her life, so that in return there was an opportunity to be with her husband. And now it's here. So should she be so nervous right now? Of course not. Andrew's most vivid memories were of his brother, even though fate tossed them in different directions. Only then, long ago, they were inseparable. They shared the pies their mother gave them, and a slap from father if we were naughty. The blame was always shared equally. Andrew was older, James was younger. But there was only a 45-minute age difference. And they were twins. Parents, not that they didn't care about their boys, but they loved them, of course, and tried to do everything they could to get them out of their lives later. As they would come out of childhood, they succeeded. They studied about the same in school, but then decided to do quite differently. Andrew went to the city to study. He always wanted to be a builder. And James said he was going to travel the world to find his happiness. Andrew then twisted his finger at his temple and sympathized with his brother, because it is necessary to be such a fool and so not serious about his future. But it remained only to wish the younger brother good luck. After graduating from vocational school, Andrew went to work and began to live in a dormitory at a construction concern, and in general lived quite well, and then love burst into his life. He met Catherine, cultured and funny at the same time. In the zoo, she reached through the grate to feed the mess. "Girl, feeding the animals is forbidden," Andrew said sternly. "Oh, I'm sorry, please, I won't do it again." Quickly bounced off the fence. Beauty in a sundress and budded like milk in color. "Now I have to pay the fine?" she asked fearfully. "No, I forgive you for the first time," said Andrew. Then, unable to stand it, laughed. He didn't admit that he wasn't actually a zookeeper. Kate laughed too and said okay, even so she understood and wouldn't do it again. And then he treated her to cotton candy. And so began their affair. And from the very beginning, Andrew realized that he was not the kind of fiancé to brag about to his girlfriends. Kate was a native citizen with a higher education and her own apartment. But she, by the way, never let him know that they were not equal. But my mother-in-law, yes, she did. It didn't come to a serious conflict. But she could only hint that Andrew came from the village, a simple laborer. His mother-in-law, by the way, had worked in trade all her life and was not a bad woman on the whole. By the way, Andrew paid for the wedding entirely from his own money. He was used to spending the minimum on himself personally, and he was glad that he could please his beloved so much that, and a dress from the boutique, and cake gorgeous, and even fireworks in her honor on the waterfront. They got married a year and a half ago. Andrew's parents could not attend the wedding. Both of them had serious health problems. So he and his young wife went to see them. They really liked Kate. But when they started asking about grandchildren, I had to disappoint them. Andrew and Kate wanted to get their own place first and then have children. In the 6 years since they left, Andrew and Kate had never seen each other from the village. Only sometimes his brother called, but every time he said he needed money. And in principle, Andrew would have been happy to help his brother. But he didn't like the way his brother lived. Always in some stories, he met in cards, he lost money to someone. He supposedly wanted to invest and lost money too. And I think he started drinking. And it turns out that interrupted James' random earnings, lived at his mistress's temporary, and it is unclear how to even exist. Andrew, of course, tried to have a serious talk with him, but nothing worked, and it was bitter and hard for him. So that's how life worked out. Why is it the same? Because their parents raised them? So why do they grow up so different? Andrew, by the way, didn't like to talk about his brother to anyone. Even with Kate, it was just a couple of phrases. Her name is so-and-so, so-and-so, long time no see. He didn't even tell her that he and James were twins, because it seemed that suddenly his beloved then, and suspect him of a penchant for a vicious lifestyle. After all, they say everyone, including even scientists and prominent ones, that twins are similar in everything. Precisely about his brother, Andrew remembered the morning when he woke up in his hotel room with his head sitting up. He wondered how James was doing. I wonder what you've gotten yourself into again. Or have you gotten your mind right? They'll be in their 30s soon enough. Andrew looked sleepily at the clock. It was 10 o'clock. A big red cockroach was sitting on the corner of the cotton nightstand and moving. It seemed to Andrew that the insect was looking straight into his soul. He forked, waved his hand, the cockroach fled. And then Andrew remembered drinking at the Bialishki, meeting Charles and signing some kind of contract. He'd gotten a new job, it seemed. That Andrew sat up abruptly on the bed, jumped up, and, staggering, grabbed some papers off the table. The fine print. What had he signed yesterday? Andrew leafed through the pages of a job on a fishing boat. Pay of $1,000 a week. Not bad. What are these extra conditions? Fines, penalties, adherence to company policy. Transferability to the contractor's company. What's that about? And why is dispute resolution only possible under the laws of some country he's never even heard of? I think it's an island. What the hell is this? Mumbled Andrew, dreading the bed back. A bad feeling creaked down his spine, chilling his pantyhose. For some reason, he felt like rushing to the airport on the way, asking his coworkers for money. Or looking in the office of any firm that gives out loans, just enough for a ticket and home to his wife. There was a sharp knock on the door, and Andrew jumped. When he opened the door, Charles was there. "Aren't you packed yet?" he asked with a smile that had something predatory in it. Andrew sang it much easier. "But first, you've got to get your paperwork in order. After all, you'll be sailing in land waters as sea hunters. By the way, the sea hunter, will be in port for a week. We should all be able to make it in that time. What if I just theoretically changed my mind?" Andrew sighed heavily. Not Brother Charles shook his head. "That's not how things are done. Who was complaining about life yesterday? Did you want to work? Of course, theoretically you could refuse. But then you'd have to pay a fine of $10,000. Andrew nodded nicely. The amount was tough, but it was possible to part with the money for the sake of not going to sea for a few months, for a job with which he was not familiar at all in his life. "Yeah, dummy. What did you think? You're gonna leave the crew short-handed? No, this is serious. Why didn't you read the contract yesterday?" "I didn't." Andrew lowered his gaze, clenched his fingers into fists, so that it wouldn't be noticeable how his hands were trembling. "If it's reliable, you said ironclad. If I'm home in 2 months." "All right, let's go." "Let's go," Charles said. And then, when Andrew took his bag with things, went out with him together on the street, and took him first to the firm, which occupied literally one office in some basement on the outskirts of the city, and then to the port to get acquainted with the ship, which bore the loud name Sea Hunter, and in general start to settle down on it slowly. The captain welcomed them warmly. He was not at all against the new man and his crew, because soon enough, he knew this little man would make him a little richer. "Kate," I walked to the garages and almost sang with joy. "She made it. She's walking without a dog, without a cane. She didn't trip. And anyway, isn't that proof that she's on the mend? I mean, where are the garages needed? She hasn't been here much. It would have been better, of course, if Mom had asked to go get her husband, but Mom was off at the health clinic. For this reason, by the way, Kate measured for the pie, the ingredients not on a scale, but in increments, but everything seemed to be getting through. Kate moved slowly through the garages, a little wary that someone might be walking their dog here without a leash, and she wouldn't notice. She almost twisted her legs a couple of times, stepping into some holes. Andrew called out to Kate as she reached the garage. From there came some sounds, creaks, and suspicious broad messages. Something it all reminded her of. In fact, she was surprised when her mother suddenly called her, saying that Andrew, he would be in the garage for a while, because the car needed to be looked at. Kate also thought that if it was not driven on it, almost managed to break down. Well, as a man, he probably knows better. "Andrew," she said again as she entered the garage, "are you at your wife's? Mom's coming over soon too, and we're all having dinner. I made your favorite there." Kate froze, blinked a lot, but it didn't get any better with her condition. Just what she saw, oh, how could it be possible? She could clearly see the back of her husband's head. He was in the car in the back seat, and he wasn't the only one there. There was another man there, a woman, Sweetly Barrett. The familiar scent of perfume, blondes clean, curly hair. Kate thought she was about to faint. Already shirtless, we noticed her, fidgeting, squeaking, the car door creaking open. Mom exhaled Kate and recoiled. "Mom, how could you?" Kate felt as if she were being carried up and down, heaven and earth, and was being carried somewhere. The young woman leaned against the wall of the garage and pressed her hand to her chest. Everything in front of her eyes was so smeared, like through a cloudy glass. And with your tears, it's like a veil. Lissa's daughter awkwardly got out of the car, pulling off her dress, holding out her pantyhose. "Daughter, did you get it wrong?" Kate didn't immediately realize there was a strange, high-pitched sound that occupied her ears. Following her mother's words was her own throaty, hysterical laughter, just really nightmarish. Pride at the same time came out of his mouth. It was a phrase that had a place in vulgar anecdotes about cheating, but in no way in real life. Kate stepped Kate, the silhouette of the man whose return she longed for. "We need to talk." "No, stay away." Kate screamed. "Is something wrong?" Came the voice of the new actor. David, a neighbor and avid car enthusiast who dreamed of assembling a retro Zhiguli from parts bought individually, peeked into the disgusting scene and into the garage. "Oh," said David when he saw everything. Actually, by this point Lisa and the men had already cleaned themselves up, but they looked shot. So that was a fat hint of something, and yet sitting on the dirty floor, Kate was kind of hinting that there was some family drama going on. "Andrew, are you holding out on David?" There was doubt in his voice. "No," the man said suddenly, and Kate even stopped crying. Would there be an end to this madness? And Andrew continued, the man who had just indulged in passion with her mom. It seemed to Kate that the garage, and the world in general, had suddenly run out of air. She reached for her throat, gagged at sewing a scarf, her fingers, sawing buttons, her coat. "Stuffy," continued the man, his brother. What the hell is he even talking about? It was like a hammer had appeared in Kate's head, and they pounded furiously at her consciousness, forcing her to balance on the edge of what seemed to be madness. What brother? Well, yes, Andrew had a brother, but they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He told me. But why did this brother look so much like him? Why was she wrong? Another guess flashed through Kate's brain. Twins, not twins. That's why she was wrong. Why? Why? Why would this brother impersonate her Andrew? No, she still couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And then David said another phrase. "That's what I'm thinking, it can't be. They've fallen out. Andrew, well, the same thing. He's dead. Dead how? Deaf?" Kate asked. "Because, oh," said David and added immediately with genuine regret. "Didn't they call you yet? Didn't tell you? We're phone buddies. We're the first ones on his record. They called me. What about you? I mean, your family, you probably couldn't. If you turned off the phones, or if they were authorized, let's say." He said something else. Those two mothers and Andrew's brother were saying something too. But Kate didn't listen to them anymore. She just fell into the saving darkness, where it was quiet, where there was nothing. She lost consciousness. The first few days of sailing on the Sea Hunter had gone smoothly, except for the fact that Andrew had discovered seasickness out of himself. It's just that up to now, he had only had the opportunity to sail on personal vessels, and in the water open to all sides of the world was much more than riding and moving the ship on the waves. So for the first 24 hours, Andrew lay in the infirmary. Then for another 2 days, he was brought up to speed. "Yes, I've got it all figured out," said Andrew, who was even offended that he was not trusted with serious work. A fisherman with 20 years' experience, who was entrusted with training the newcomer, said Benjamin. "I will not give a briefing now, and you will be thrown on the rope or fall overboard. And who will be responsible then? So, in principle, it is safe to work here. Carefully, so as not to give away your timidity in front of the formidable sea elements." Asked Andrew. "Normal. But there are, of course, cases," shrugged Benjamin. "Unfortunate. No, it's rare," said the man and looked at the new guy. "It's kind of weird. You just be careful." "Okay, careful with what?" "Well, can you be more specific about what I should be careful of?" "I don't get it." "Mermaids?" Andrew grinned. "It's better to keep silent about them. Let the scientists prove that they are evolutionarily impossible. But we sailors don't joke about such things." Benjamin wagged his finger. They walked a little farther. They stopped at the side of the boat. Benjamin scratched the back of his head, fastened his jacket and put his hands in his pockets, looking around as if he didn't want anyone to hear them. "See, here's the thing. We used to swim normally all the time. Well, there were cases, of course, but injuries are common. It's probably not unheard of at your construction site. But then, in general, we have people from the crew disappearing overboard." Asked Andrew. And even before Benjamin answered again, that familiar feeling of misgiving, like when touched, no. Well, I mean, a couple sort of fell overboard. Just Ben from a neighboring ship that was passing by didn't notice anything in the water. Port, when they came in from the south, mice disappeared there too, sometimes as far as Indonesia. A lot of rounded eyes. Andrew. Well, what can be drunk or out for a walk? Maybe you start to think about things. But now we're in the neighborhood. Andrew shrugged. I gotta get home to my family. Charles told me he's going on a trip for 2 months. I gotta get home to my wife. I miss her. Yeah, but we are not going along the coast. We are going to the Japanese territorial waters. Don't worry, it's all legal. There are official agreements with fishing companies. That's right. Benjamin's words calmed Andrew down a bit, and now he even began to think that everything that had happened was for the best. He would have something to brag about when he returned. Here, they say, even became a sailor. And if it is possible to earn here, as well as Charles promised, then maybe, thought Andrew, he would leave the construction site altogether and become a fisherman. He was about to ask Benjamin about the salary, but he said it was time for lunch, so Andrew went on his way. He was feeling better. The seasickness was receding. He was used to it, I guess, and he could see the near future clear without a storm. But after a while, events took a very different turn. It happened when the Sea Hunter entered the territorial waters of Japan. Andrew had already had a chance to see how huge nets were used to pull out the catch, and even take part in it. The work, of course, was yuck, what a smell, and heavy. But he decided that, as a man should, he would bravely hold on. And then one evening there was another ship nearby. A small ship was just passing by and was following the same course. And so when it got dark, Andrew was instructed to go and check the equipment with which the nets went up. He shrugged his shoulders and went to do as he was told. He was not surprised when the captain suddenly joined him on the deck. He thought that the captain was in the ship's cabin with everyone else, and the crew had an extra break in honor of successful fishing. And there everyone was watching some comedy and eating raisin buns. Andrew was freezing on deck and was looking forward to joining the others and getting some rest. Andrew. It occurred to him that the captain must be accompanying him so that as a newcomer he wouldn't make a mistake with anything. Andrew was even touched by such care for the staff. What do they want? Asked Andrew. Because suddenly he noticed on the left side they were standing a boat with several people. It looked like they came from that ship, which was still looming in the distance. Maybe they're in trouble, and they needed help. Andrew turned away from the captain and waved to the people in the boat. And in the next instant he was hit on the back of the head hard, but gently, expertly. Andrew Mayakov's body, heavy at once, muttered. The captain picked Andrew up and threw him over the side. And then Andrew flew down and fell right next to the boat, from which he was grabbed and dragged inside. And then, just as they had come, that is, with the engine turned off, they moved on oars towards the very vessel that had been sailing alongside the Sea Hunter for the last 24 hours. But now these fellow travelers had changed course. They had gotten what they wanted. Kate woke up on the couch in the living room. Taking her mother's face away from the vial she was using to bring her to her senses. The children all whispered to Kate and sat up. She was still dizzy. Kate, David was here and he talked to her, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What? What did you say? How could he? How could he die you? Did you mess something up? Daughter, calm down. Let's talk about everything calmly. How could you? Kate waved her mother away, and the latter recoiled, shaking her head. Although Kate couldn't see clearly, she was. Sure enough, her mother hit her lips disapprovingly. Then Kate sighed. She realized that if she gave into panic and hysteria now, she wouldn't be able to figure anything out at all. There's some kind of mistake, she repeated. It's surreal what's going on here. Her husband, his brother, her mother. David, you said Kate first. The neighbor nodded and spoke. It turned out that he'd gotten a call from Japan directly from there, because that was the side that was searching for the missing man from Andrew's fishing boat. What fishing boat? James wondered. My brother was a builder, actually. Well, apparently he decided to retrain. David sighed. You understand, I'm only giving you someone else's words. Anyway, he was on the ship, and then he disappeared. They thought that he fell overboard, accidentally fell off, because he was an inexperienced fisherman. They searched for him, but they didn't find him. The search was called off. It'll be a while before he's declared dead. My husband is not dead, Kate said, and her voice sounded suddenly firm. He couldn't have drowned. No, that's not true. He must be alive, because she stepped with her nose. Of course, one must believe and hope. Things happen in the world, they don't. Can I ask you a question? Are you Brother Andrew? Yes, James said. It's been a long time since we've spoken in person, so I decided to visit, and I came. If Kate had been able to see better, she could have watched the scarlet color flood the cheeks of her mother's neck and even her ears. But only neighbor David saw it. He made some comparisons and assumptions, and he too blushed and smirked meaningfully. What a story, David thought. This James was a young guy and, figuratively speaking, was almost Lisa's son. Yes, he was also an exact copy of her son-in-law, only that James's face seemed rougher. Yeah, he was broader in the shoulders and weighed a bit more. So the twins clearly resembled him. They're ladies in solid years. David now couldn't escape the thought of what he'd seen in the garage. And he swore to himself I wouldn't say a word. It was not enough for Kate and Lisa to realize who had caused the gossip to fly around the house and yard. So David decided to be as dumb as a pharaoh's tomb. About family intrigue, possible love affairs, and about Andrew's disappearance too. David was very soon scrambling to get home. He refused tea and only gave Kate the phone number of the detective from Japan who had called him, and said that this detective had also called her Kate, but said he couldn't get through. Kate sighed as David repeated his words. So she'd had her phone charged this morning, and then she'd gotten wrapped up in the kitchen and forgotten all about it. He added David in French, by the way, but he kind of promised that he could have a translator on the phone if necessary. I learned English in college. They sent me, starting with my parents. They thought maybe I'd become a big man. But I smiled at David. To the factory to make ice cream. Went to this is also a good thing, right? All right, I sighed. I've got you all caught up in my personal stuff, sorry. And again, sympathy, hang in there. Well, I went, and David left. James' mom told Kate we need to have a serious talk. What's the grief? Lisa shook her hands. I just don't know what to do. Should I make some tea? Does it help your nerves? No, Mom, we'll talk about everything. We'll talk about it right now. Kate didn't see. She could look, and she looked angry, resentful, and determined. Not just like that. Right now, Kate was determined. And she also had a strong, barely surmountable urge to knock Sergius over the head with something, but she didn't do it. And not so much out of the goodness of her character in general, as because of the fact that this man looked so much like her husband. Andrew sat in the corner of the Triumph and felt nauseous. Seasickness had returned, whether the captain had accidentally given him a concussion. Either it was the stinky, salty fish, and not the cleanest water they'd stocked it with. It didn't take long to figure out what had happened to him. When Andrew woke up on that small, nameless ship, it was clearly explained to him that now he was a prisoner for the whole world. But he was also a valuable man at the same time, and literally valuable, because the captain had been paid 4,000 American dollars in cash for him. And now he would work off that money. But first he'll be sold again, and maybe again. How's it gonna go? Come on, man. How can you sell a live human being? Like cattle? What kind of livestock? Andrew then even thought it was some kind of crazy joke. But that last straw of hope cracked a moment later when he realized no, it was the whole truth. Then Andrew was beaten for the first time and told not to ask any more idiotic questions and not to talk at all. The slave traders themselves had spoken to him, by the way, in a wild mixture of English and Russian. And then, Andrew at first was terribly pleased when he realized that he was with him on this trial. The name of which, by the way, he never learned. Benjamin is here. What an idiot. I said Benjamin, who, by the way, also got hurt when they were alone. They were locked in the hold. I suspected something was going on. I should have told someone sooner who'd listen. It turned out that Benjamin, who'd been having trouble with us missing crew members under suspicious circumstances, decided to break into the captain's cabin. See if there's anything there. Captain caught him doing it. A fight ensued. The captain got the upper hand, and although he didn't intend to do it, he threw Benjamin off, so to speak, as a compliment to Andrew. "What do you mean?" asked Andrew. Gritting his teeth from the cold, he was still in his wet clothes. "We're really in bondage now. It's no good getting one of these. We got to get out, so when we get into port, who's nice to you? Did the man say we're even going into port?" Benjamin grinned bitterly and began his story. Andrew listened with dazed eyes. It turned out that Benjamin was a very well-informed man about all the dark things in the world. He told that fishing in the seas and oceans of the world is often done illegally, and they make as much money on this scale as on trade in other illegal things. And to keep costs down, and to keep anyone from blabbing, slave labor is often used. Now we can only wonder, where will we end up? Argentina or closer to India in Southeast Asia? "What are you telling me?" In a colorless voice, Andrew said, "No, I don't agree. We need to save ourselves. We can swim." He suggested, "The first option that comes to mind is what style of swim?" "Ellen, I hope that dolphins swim by as a cab catch and grab his fin. Or are you planning to steal a lifeboat? I thought you told me you couldn't swim." "I don't know how to swim," Andrew sighed, and thought that he would give anything to be on solid ground. "We have to save ourselves, but don't be stupid. It is also necessary to break smart people has. Trust me, the sea is deep and full of hungry fish. I think we should lay low for now." Benjamin thought Andrew was a good man, but he didn't share something important with him, namely the fact that he had sent a couple of messages to his friends and acquaintances before he went to the captain's house, sending word, so to speak, that they could start unraveling the damn thing, and send it all to Benjamin over an encrypted internet connection. So no matter how much the captain digs through his phone, he can't find it. So Benjamin decided to keep quiet for now. Not that he didn't trust Andrew, but he didn't know how things would turn out. And he didn't want him, for example, to blurt it out by accident or under pressure, and thus finally abruptly turn them both into the worst of all possible scenarios. Over the next few days or weeks, Andrew lost track of time altogether. The Russian prisoners were thrown from ship to ship several times. The ships did not enter any ports, and the captives were not told where they were going. But because it was getting warmer and the seascape was changing, as well as listening to the speeches of the ship's crews, it was possible to conclude that they were moving somewhere in a southerly direction and closer to Southeast Asia. The final destination for Andrew and Benjamin was eventually a fishing boat. Keller was fishing illegally in the Indian Ocean, and they weren't the only metalworkers there. There were nearly a dozen others, mostly from India. But there was also one Australian, even one who had been sold into slavery, as well as their own who had agreed to long labor because his family owed the local gangsters. Most of the forced laborers were here for a short time, no more than 3 years. But one kid from Bangladesh, whom everyone called Jim for some reason, explained that he had been here for 7 years. Benjamin, as a man who knows English better, translated Jim's story to Andrew, and it was quite banal. He got married, he and his beloved were expecting a child, and he went to work. And then in a coastal village, in a bar, a stranger came up to him and said that there was a topic. "There's a way to make a quick buck. I cannot hear for years," Andrew said then. And he no longer cared that he was a man, and he had tears in his eyes. "I have a mother and father to see. I have a wife to love. I have to go back." They worked their asses off, not eating rice and the smallest fish they could catch. Andrew had run dozens of rescue scenarios in his head over the weeks, both for himself and for everyone. Then he looked again at the armed crew. 6 men, all strong, not exhausted by starvation and grueling labor guys, and realized they had no chance. And then one day, Andrew did a rash thing. All he did was go to ask for medicine for Jim. Poor guy hurt his hand on some spiny fish in the vaporizer. Kid's got a fever, and he's delirious. The captain went to see to his slaves. And when in the morning everyone went back to work, Jim was not among them. Andrew was startled. He suddenly realized that by his care he had brought danger upon the lad. If he had not called the attention of the main man on that dreadful ship, the lad might have been different himself, especially since Jim had said that this sort of thing had happened to him before. Now here was Andrew feeling terribly guilty. But that wasn't the only thing. A swelling of feelings. Asshole. Andrew went to the captain. What did you do to him? The other sailor slaves tried to stop him. But Andrew, driven by a just thirst for revenge, managed to smear the captain and, it seems, broke his nose. He had no doubt that Jim had been thrown overboard. Captain, when Andrew was dragged away from him, the big man stared in amazement, and then angrily, laughing, said that nothing Andrew would soon learn to behave and handcuffed him to the board, forbade to give him food and water. The scorching sun, under which Andrew spent the whole day, seemed to bring unbearable torment. But in the evening, as the storm played out on the sea, Andrew realized that it could be even worse. It seemed incredible how the water in these warm lands could be such an icy storm. Kate moved his lips. I'll come back to you. And then the impact of the waves simply sealed him to the side, and Andrew lost consciousness. Lissa hadn't gotten to her daughter. It just didn't make sense now. And she said frankly, and even with a challenge in her voice, that she and James were lovers. What did you want? She threw to her daughter. I'm not an old woman yet. At my age, by the way, the second youth begins. It's not like I've made an attempt on your husband. So don't get hysterical with me. But why did you have to lie? Why didn't you just say he was Andrew's brother? Why all the mystery of Kate's mom? I'm so sorry. What's the point of dredging up the past now? The past was literally yesterday and today. Kate knew well this technique when her mother began to apologize, obviously for the sake of appearances, and just increases the subjects of serious conversation, insisted that life should continue as before and without discussing what happened. Lissa, don't worry, it's bad for your heart, interrupted the preparers. What else is there to say to him and James? And it sounded so sweet and caring that Kate didn't know how to react. Laugh or spit. She was just in shock at her mother. It all started a long time ago. James began his story. He had left his brother and gone to the big city to get his hopes up. That money would fall from the sky. He, of course, did not expect and realized will have to how to spin to rise. At first, James got a job as a laborer at the market, but the pay was not fat, and also had to spend on a room, which was rented in the company of the same laborers on the outskirts of the Granny Lonely. After a couple of weeks, I started having backaches, and then, when James pulled his shoulder and couldn't go to work, he realized the dire situation he was in. Something had to change, and the opportunity presented itself suddenly. James then went to the store, as always, to buy the cheapest on offer. At the crossroads, he saw a girl coming out of another store. The pretty girl was all hung with paper bags with loud brand names. She got on a bus with a driver and drove off. And then James had a second realization. He would never have a normal, beautiful, easy life if he keeps floundering like he's been floundering. Not like the universe itself was sending him one sign after another. James saw the flags on the pavement, similar to the one that beauty had dropped on him. And it said about a new show program in a famous nightclub. And then it hit James exactly. He remembered how in his youth, when he and his brother went to the village disco, when there was a scuffle, he always managed to dashingly restore order there. No, James himself knew how to fight, but he also knew how to calm down the rowdy ones like Czechs, who'd had too much to drink or who were just out of character. So he went straight to the nightclub. And there it was. Coincidence needed just such a man, only unusual bouncer. The administrator told him. A blonde in her 40s with a gorgeous shape. We need someone who knows how to handle problems delicately. We value our reputation. I agree to everything. Lusciously, sweetly stretched the administrator and undid the button on a silk blouse. Well then, let me then you from the conversation. True, specifically this moment with a piquant hint James in his story missed. He simply told Kate that he was hired in a nightclub as a security guard, and he worked there successfully. But then another man was hired. It just happened. a misunderstanding happened. James again, he left out one thing. Because in fact, he was trying to get acquainted with one guest of the club, not paying attention to the fact that she had a ring on her finger. Then an angry husband came along. So James lost his job. And as the cherry on the cake, he was barred from any other decent similar establishments in the city. But James was lucky. During his time at the club, he made a lot of useful acquaintances. And he was not literally left on the street. He was helped to get a job as a salesman in an expensive store, and there he worked for almost 2 years. True, as he is guilty, he recognized that he never managed to save money. So he lived literally from paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes he tried to enter some business, or rather, in a quick win-win investment, but as each time he ran into fraud. And then James was diagnosed with a disease, not one that was incurable. But there were heart problems and needed to be treated, and the main thing was not to overload at work. My brother must have said we weren't very lotta. James grinned bitterly. Kate nodded. Yes, Andrew usually referred to his brother with the obligatory adjective. Fool, dumbass, stupid, or something like that. Except we're not strangers. People were socializing, James continued. And now, it seemed, he was beginning to get to a particular part of his story that he was particularly uncomfortable telling. He complained to me not long ago that you two were fighting. Kate nodded again. Yes, that was true. There had been disagreements in the family and above all over Andrew's working shifts. Kate insisted that her husband should be home, that she didn't like him being away so long. Andrew reasoned that he would earn more there and accordingly. They are more likely to take an apartment in the mortgage and in general. He's doing it for her. And if it's for my sake, then I need you around. Kate was almost crying at times like this. And right now she had no rest that in the last wave, when Andrew talked with Andrew, they communicated dryly, hardly as can communicate loving spouses, forced separation. But I made up my mind, too, James said, and fell silent. To what? Well, talk, I don't get it anymore, Kate. I thought I might seduce you. I apologize. Wait a minute, Hanaka. Tell it like it is. What do you mean, seduce? And what does that have to do with my mom? How are you two doing? If you let me go on, I'll tell you everything. James muttered. Kate gave him that opportunity, and he continued. James decided that his resemblance to Andrew could be terribly useful. That Kate might be tempted by that very resemblance. But James had Kate all to himself. Yes, long ago on the eve of the wedding, to which James could not come, and so just called and verbally congratulated his young wife. And so James took the same number and sent a message saying, so and so. I'm your husband's brother. We haven't talked in a while. We're in the family way. How are you doing? He also added that he had heard rumors through his brother that he and Kate were fighting. And James assured her that he was personally on her side. Andrew, he's a fool for not appreciating what a treasure he has in his wife. And James included a picture of himself with the message. He's all handsome at the gym. But it so happened that at the time when the message came, this Kate forgot his phone at home, and his mom accidentally read it. At first, she was very surprised that her son-in-law, it turns out, has such a brother. And then, well, that's where Lisa came into the conversation. You know, she said, dimming her gaze. I've been trying to get my life together for a long time. I've been on dating sites. I've tried dating people my own age, and nothing works. Then some grandfathers write. Then just fools scare me. And here I sent him Seriosha a quick message that say, do not need to this number to communicate with us, that no one recognized unnecessary. Right, let's go to another one. I didn't tell him this number. So Lisa waved her hands. James thought he was talking to you. It turned out that Lisa was immediately attracted to James and pretended to care about him. Wait, now why would you want to seduce me? Is this some kind of original way to get back at your brother? Did Kate interrupt the story? No, that's not what I was hoping for. And he confessed. When he announced his plan, Kate was shocked, although it seemed like a lot more than that. It turned out that James was counting on Kate falling in love with him. After all, he looks exactly like his brother. Well, in content, so to speak, he could be, unlike Andrew, the man of dreams. James, fame, the elements, and dozens hundreds of compliments. He planned that Kate would divorce Andrew, and then he, taking his brother's place, would move into her apartment and get a residence permit. And then he could get a job at the firm where Kate had such great connections. "What connections?" exclaimed the girl who could not understand anything at all. "You see," the mother explained, "I wanted to keep James interested, to keep him interested. And I told him that your boss was your lover, and out of old friendship, so to speak, would hire James even without a college degree." "William," Kate gasped. Here now in any framework, even the wildest fantasies did not fit. Because William was 62 years old, happily married for over 30 years, and was generally the sweetest, most down-to-earth, and kindest man. How could you do that? Kate, feeling resentful for having insulted William to a degree hardly greater than that her mother had even contrived such a sordid affair involving her. "So I decided to come home from work, and they fired me, pinned the shortfall on me, and I didn't steal," James said. "Well, we'll take our word for it." Kate grinned grimly. "I said I'd be there," James continued, letting her words sink in. "And then your mom showed up. She confessed everything, told me that I wasn't really texting her with you. It was like a joy the whole time. And how are you? You're fine, yeah. But why? Why you?" She pointed her finger at the guy and you. She pointed her finger at the mother. "Why the whole circus with him, Andrew? What were you trying to accomplish? Answer me, and stop lying to me." Lisa, the mumbling was about how Katya shouldn't be nervous. But then, when she barked at her menacingly again, she just took it upon herself to explain. She said she was fine with it. After all, it was well known that Kate couldn't stand strangers in the house. Lisa thought that she might not want to have James as a guest, since Andrew had spoken so negatively about him. And this is where Lisa decided to use the fact that her daughter has vision problems. She decided it wouldn't be a bad idea for James to hook up with Andrew for a couple days. And then she'd get the guy an apartment, and he'd move out. And then what? It seemed to Kate more and more that this unreal life was going on around her, that she was in a bad movie, which had an incomprehensible madman screenwriter. And it would be nice, by the way, to remember to prescribe a happy ending. What you would have said when Andrew came back, I would have thought about it. Lisa sighed. "I just wanted to do something about it now. Daughter, can't you understand me a little? I'm just not an old woman. I want love too." Kate chuckled. Yes, Mom was partly right. For her age, Lisa had an amazing figure. She was slender, lush in all the right places. She moved easily and even gracefully, could dress tastefully, and didn't overuse decorative cosmetics. And in fact, before the whole ugly story was revealed, Kate, it was even pleasant when acquaintances or casual passers-by complimented her mother. She was just happy for her mother that she had retained her charm at such an age. Except now she couldn't admire it anymore for some reason. "That's just great." "Yeah, I'm Kate," exclaimed again. "Yeah, my heart almost stopped. When I saw you guys, Mom and you." She turned to James. "I guess Andrew was always talking about you for a reason. Is that how much you need the money? You destroy your own brother's family for it. And then have an affair with his mother-in-law. I realize I deserve the worst words, but you haven't lived my life, and you can't know what I'm thinking and feeling. And I don't want to know, and I'm not going to get into it." Kate jumped up off the couch. "Now get out of my house." "Kate, this is my house too, and James isn't going anywhere. Besides, how can you be so cruel?" Lisa's voice trembled. "He just lost his brother. Andrew's not dead. He's alive. There's something wrong. It's impossible. There's some kind of mistake. And I know it. When Andrew woke up, he thought he'd probably drowned and gone to the other side. Otherwise, why is it so bright? What's blinding his eyes?" Softly lying down, nothing hurt. But as consciousness cleared, everything became clearer. The light was hitting his eyes from the lamp hanging from the ceiling, lying softly on the clean bed, and nothing hurt, because he had been injected with a horse dose of anesthetic antibiotics and all sorts of other drugs. He was informed about it by the doctor, who, as it turned out, came every now and then to visit the patient, to check how he was doing. Naturally, Andrew had a lot of questions, And if he could only speak normally, he would have pelted the doctor with them. But his voice wouldn't listen. It was explained to him that it was from shock, because he had indeed almost drowned. But it would soon pass. And the doctor, as if he had read his mind, immediately satisfied his curiosity by telling him what had happened. It turned out that he was incredibly lucky, because the night before, when the ship was caught in a storm, two things happened at once. First of all, the very boy named Jim, about whom Andrew thought he was dead, survived. He was picked up by a cruise liner that happened to be sailing in the same waters. And Jim, of course, immediately told of his troubles. The crew of the liner rushed to contact the authorities. Secondly, at about the same time, the friends Benjamin had contacted before he joined Andrew finally began to act. The thing was that Benjamin had sent messages to several of his friends, but something happened with the internet connection, and his message was finally received by only one person, who coincidentally was in India at the time. And everything spiraled in the sense that Benjamin managed to send not a simple message saying, "I'm in trouble. Help me, help me." But he also managed to send some important documentary evidence, confirming the fact that the captain of the Sea Hunter for several years not only fished, but also sold people into slavery. Neatly, their disappearance on the theory that the fishermen could have simply fallen overboard or escaped to the port of some warm country to stay there illegally. And so it all turned out that this very acquaintance Benjamin further managed to raise the right people, to involve some organizations. Plus Jim's testimony added to the mix. And when one thing added up to another, it just so happened that it became clear on which particular ship Benjamin and Andrew were being held captive. Then Kelly was chased, interrupted by the storm. Kelly was caught, barely behind him. And the storm, by the way, even helped, because the pirate, in fact, a fishing vessel, turned out to be badly battered and could not develop much speed to evade the chase. Finally, the ship was arrested, as was its crew, and the captives were released. All of them required medical attention to one degree or another. But Andrew was hurt more than anyone else. The doctor said that Andrew would probably stay in the hospital for a month, and then he would have to stay in a foreign country because his testimony, as well as the testimony of other prisoners, is extremely important in order to bring the villains to the deserved responsibility. "I cannot so long, weakly and resolutely at the same time," said Andrew. "Doctor, I'm asking you, purely as a human being, is there any way to speed things up with these depositions? And will you write me up as soon as possible under my responsibility without claims or whatever it is supposed to be? I have to see my wife." The doctor looked at the man in surprise. This man had been through something almost unbelievable. But why can't he just lie down now, recover his strength? Why is he so eager to fly away as soon as possible? Perhaps, thought the doctor, this man loves his family very much. All right then, I'll see what I can do in your case. For a week at least, we'll support you. In the meantime, is there anyone you'd like to call? Yeah, I want to call my wife and my parents. Tell them I'm okay. They'd probably lost me by now. The long conversation bored Andrew, and he leaned back impotently on the pillow. When the doctor left, a nurse soon came in, bringing food and medicine. And a telephone, and Andrew dialed the first number. First, he called his parents. The lovingly prepared dinner had gone largely untouched that day. Kate had gone to her room immediately after talking to her mother and James. How she wished that it all turned out to be just a nightmare, and that when she woke up, everything was fine. And Andriusha, the man she loved, would be alive and well. Must be from a strong nervous excitement. Kate fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, but woke up unexpectedly early for herself. At 5:00 a.m. she glanced at her phone. What time was it? And noticed the missed call icon. Her heart skipped a beat. A strange premonition prickled in her chest, as if something disturbing had happened, and yet she was soon to receive good news. Kate remembered that David had told the neighbor that some foreign services were investigating Andriusha's accidental disappearance on the open sea, and that they promised to call back when they had some details. So maybe they were the ones who called. No, Kate realized she wouldn't bring herself to dial the unknown number because she was afraid of hearing the worst. that Andrew had been found and that he was dead. But she didn't have to do that, because the phone rang again. Translating the subject into the air through clenched teeth, Kate pressed the button to accept the call. But not a word was spoken, and she almost screamed when she heard her husband's voice on the other side. Beloved at last, and once again she found her voice. Andrew, are you alive? Where are you? What happened? You're all right. The wife was flooded with questions. What could Andrew answer her? He realized that it was impossible to tell the whole truth because he didn't want to alarm Kate. And the mother-in-law scares with her adventures, even if they have already ended, as it was not desirable. Only after the first phrases she said, Andrew realized that there was no point in hiding. He hurried to assure Kate that now everything was fine with him, that he was in no danger now. No, you don't have to come to me. Don't worry, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. I'm being treated here. It's a nice room. You can see the palm trees from the window. Kate added he feels like he's going to cry a little more. I'll get back on my feet, and I promise to go to the sea. I will definitely do everything to make you live happily at my place. I don't want to go to the sea. Through tears of joy, answered Kate. Just come home soon. And then it happened accidentally that she let it slip that she was ill. Andrew, of course, got very excited. After all, the eyes, as he said, are not some shoulder bones in which necessarily grow. It's much more complicated than that. Kate, for her part, assured Andrew that she was feeling better. Then she told him that James was staying with them. But of course, Kate wouldn't reveal the specifics of his visit. At first, she simply said your brother was visiting. Andrew said that was very good because it was high time they saw each other. After this conversation, Andrew began to rush the doctor, even more so that he would be discharged as soon as possible. Also, as soon as he could stand up and walk, Andrew demanded to see Benjamin. Thank you, Andrew said. For what? Benjamin asked. Yes, for being there for me the whole time, keeping me going. Without you, I wouldn't have lasted. You're the strong one. By the way, what are you going to do next? Home to your people? Said Andrew. And of course, no matter how much they pay, I won't go on shifts. I'll find a job near home. That's the only way now. What do you think you'll do? I'm going home too. I've got a mother, nephews, sister. I've got to get out of here too. I'll work on the river. Maybe I'll give rides to tourists or fix boats. Well, by the way, come visit me sometime. Our Volga is beautiful. No Maldives can compare. I will, nodded Andrew. They talked some more. And then Benjamin said that the Charles that Andrew had so predatorily recruited, that he too had already been captured, had caught up with him in London, when the plane had just landed. All in all, it looked like Benjamin and Andrew were the latest victims of one large, wide-ranging network of a human trafficking criminal organization. Only I want to go on living my life in peace, Andrew said. In the sense that no journalists, no interviews. Benjamin agreed with him and recommended to ignore all such offers. That way everyone would get off his back quicker. Finally, after a few days, Andrew was able to go to the airport. He still felt weak and unimportant. But what did it matter that he was coming home, and at home? I think, in the meantime, a very important question was being decided. And the thing was, Kate thought that James should confess to his brother his not beautiful yes, something about his nightmarish act. He'd forgive you. Their family. She repeated stubbornly. You may be married, but you don't know Andrew very well, James replied grimly. No, he's sorry, but he'll remember it for the rest of his life. Daughter, do you have any idea what would happen if he found out? Lissa was really worried. Do you think you can just forget it and pretend it never happened and go on living as before? No, of course not, but at least for a while. How much has happened? Do you need to have a quiet talk? Not in a hurry. We need to come to an understanding. We're not strangers. Kate had to agree. Not so much because she understood her mother as because she didn't want to disturb Andrew, who, of course, needed a quiet atmosphere after what had happened. David's neighbor was a good man. He kept his promise about not blabbing to anyone or anything. He could not, as a result of which very soon all acquaintances and neighbors, not to mention relatives, were aware that Andrew had decided to become a sailor and fisherman for some reason. And at first, these people went to Kate's house to express their condolences. And then they were quite shocked by the news that Andrew was alive and back home. And besides, Andrew took and told briefly about what had happened to him to the same Dmitri. And he, of course, spread it everywhere and to everyone. So Andrew soon got all the attention he feared. Thankfully, at least without journalists, but all acquaintances now as if it was their duty to ask him about what had happened. And this story slowly became in people's retellings more and more new details, and often fictitious. And in its, so to speak, final version, it presented the story of how Andrew alone confronted in the sea mafia and powerful clan of a pack of sharks. Dovskum in the story somehow managed to appear sultry beauty Italian, the daughter of the Italian head of the mafia, which Andrew tempted millions and her charms, but he refused her for the legitimate wife. And in the end, Andrew, from all these gossip and rumors, on which it was almost possible to shoot a movie, he was so tired of them that I was thinking of even starting to move to another city. But then in the environment of acquaintances, friends, and relatives happened a new event. Someone cheated on someone had a child out of wedlock. And very soon, Andrew's story receded into the background. We could breathe easy. Well, it seemed that way. And then Kate just realized at one point that she couldn't lie to her husband anymore. Even if the lie required not talking, but just keeping her mouth shut. But she couldn't hide anymore. And one day, when Mom and James weren't home, she told Andrew everything. And Andrew, of course, was shocked. But after everything he'd been through, he had a different outlook on life. And although now he realized the baseness of his brother's deed, he also realized that it was nothing compared to what he had experienced. "Why are you so calm?" asked concerned Kate, who generally already showed that her husband had fallen into a kind of trance of thoughtfulness. "I'm restless," Andrew answered honestly. "Only I won't do anything at all. In the sense that I don't want to quarrel with my brother. He's certainly shown his intelligence and morals. But you know, after all this, I think I'll just talk to him and explain that, unfortunately, he doesn't belong in our house. Except it's also my mom's house." Kate said shyly, "You're right. But I thought let's eat. But where to? We don't have enough for a mortgage yet. You still have to find a stable job to get it approved. I know all that, but at least we can afford a rented place. What do you say?" Kate was very happy to hear that. And just 3 days later, they moved into an apartment found through a realtor they knew. "Maybe I should stay home?" asked Andrew excitedly to his wife. He had a job interview scheduled for 3 days today. Kate had not been feeling well since morning. Perhaps she told her husband ate, and at breakfast the yogurt was not of good quality by any means. "Make sure you come with me. Everything will be fine, I promise." It was only when the door closed behind her husband that Kate stopped smiling and hurried through the hole on Thu 100 to the bathroom. And it was necessary to finally test her suspicions. With trembling hands, the young woman pulled out a pregnancy test from under a stack of towels. Andrew hadn't really expected to get the job. It was about the position of foreman in a solid organization, engaged in the design and construction of cottages and summer houses. In terms of the basic requirements, Andrew seemed to be suitable for this position, but still going into the office for an interview was not to the end. I'm sure he answered the standard questions. "So why do you want to work for us?" asked a young blonde who held the position of head of the personnel department. Seems, judging by her last name, she was related to the owner of the entire company. "I have a family to support," Andrew answered honestly, "and I'd like to gain experience. One day I'd like to build a house for my wife and kids myself. That is, I realize that I will not be able to handle everything myself, for example, the foundation. But everything that is possible, I would like to do with my own hands. So I need to gain all kinds of experience. And it seems that this is exactly what your company can help with." The blonde was satisfied with this answer. And she, to Andrew's pleasant surprise, informed him that no, he would not have to wait for the call. It had already been accepted. Andrew did not go home, but flew. But on the way, he did not forget about something important. He stopped by the flower store for a bouquet for his beloved, and also in the confectionery for a set of exquisite cakes. They had something to celebrate today, but there was a surprise waiting for him at home, or rather two surprises. Lisa called her daughter in the moments when she was barely recovering from the results of the pregnancy test. "Yes, Mom, this is an emergency," Kate said. "I'm just a little busy right now." Lisa too, moratorium on what? It's very urgent and sobbing. "I told you what happened." Since the daughter and son-in-law left, Lisa has been living in an apartment with James. Yeah, they were starting to live as a couple, and she didn't care what anyone said. And of course, they had something to say about their age difference and the fact that James was Lisa's brother and twin brother-in-law. But she didn't care. She felt airy happy. A second youth had come to her. Lisa also spoiled James. She updated his closet, gave him a cell phone, and then emptied both of his accounts, where she'd been saving money just in case. She supported her lover, closed his loan, plus gave him money for nothing, because James told everything. Just all ears were buzzing about some mega profitable investment project. In general, the life of an unusual couple was booming. Lisa even began to think about the marriage ceremony and even thought about what she would like: a dress that was not pure white, of course. It would not correspond to her age. Well, maybe a shade of ivory. "Mom, you called me to tell me how you two sweethearts are doing." "Life is good. Let me just say I'm happy for you and we'll call it a day." "Okay, after all, I'd probably be the wrong daughter to wish you and James apart. But I can't wish for your marital happiness either." The daughter broke down on the other side sobbing. "Lisa, so James left me. Turns out the newlywed and 5 minutes away." Fiancé literally disappeared from Lisa's life. Just when she got home one day, she didn't find him there. But she did find a touching note saying that he, James, was immensely grateful to Lisa for everything she had done for him, that she had left a lifelong memory in his heart. But he, alas and is not yet ready for a serious relationship because he needs to find himself in this big world. In this regard, James asked him to forgive him if he had offended him in any way. He wished his sweetheart a Lezginka of all the best, including love, and went somewhere else. By the way, James took all her gifts, including a new watch, an expensive smartphone from a famous brand, the latest model, and of course, a substantial amount of cash. Ah, Mom. Kate sat up like that. Hearing all this, "I'm so sorry." She was crystal sincere. She really felt sorry for her mom, who seemed to have a crush on her. They talked some more. Lisa said that no, she wasn't angry with James, and she realized that she had brought it on herself. It was her own fault for believing that their love could be real. Mom said to Kate, "I need to tell you something too. I'm pregnant." Andrew, the same news found out, barely crossed the threshold. At first he was taken aback, but then he laughed, picked up his beloved in his arms, spun around the apartment, and putting her in her place, demanded Kate. And Andrew did so. "And now I will always fulfill all your wishes with tenderness," he said. Such an important change in the life of their little family soon had serious consequences. Plus, they had to take into account what had happened in Kate's mom's life. And first of all, the couple made a decision to return to the old apartment, especially since the mother-in-law was calling. Thus, they could solidly save on housing, which of course, against the background of a soon addition to the family, was not at all superfluous. Naturally, the family reunion was accompanied by some awkwardness. But slowly Lisa began to communicate with her daughter and son-in-law almost as before, only with the amendment that now she spoke to Andrew much more gently and did not express her dislike for him. "Mother, where do you enjoy yourself so much?" Kate asked once. "Yes," so smiled embarrassed Lisa. She was standing at the mirror, adjusting a silk scarf around her neck. "Did the Cavalier declare himself, or what?" Kate jokingly inquired. "Maybe the boyfriend is at least 20 years old and has a daughter, but you'll remember Tommy for a long time." She wasn't really offended, though. And in fact, now, looking back, Lisa realized that while she had been blinded by the crush, she had been blinded by it. James, with whom had been clear from the beginning that nothing could work out. But now it was different. Right now, Lisa was on her way to meet an old acquaintance of hers, Eugene. He was her age, and they had been in the local flower club together for a long time. "Daughter, we need to talk." Lisa couldn't stand it any longer because she couldn't keep such important information to herself. The fact was that now, 6 months into the relationship, it had already become clear that she and Eugene were serious. His children were long grown up and lived far away. He lived alone in his large apartment, and now Kate's mom was thinking about moving in with him, as well as making the relationship with this man official, especially since both had been his original idea. "You've told your daughter about all of this now. I understand if you say I'm not getting serious again." She's got her head down. "Only I think it's serious and real now. You see, I want daughters too." Kate's mom gave her a big hug. "I didn't mean that at all. On the contrary, even I think you are doing the right thing, and I think you will be very happy yet." At the due date, Kate gave birth to a child. It was a girl, and they decided to name her Valerie. People around her said that her eyes were all daddy's, and her nose was exactly like her mom's. Andrew, by this time, had already managed to get a good foothold at work, and he and Kate decided that, perhaps, will not take an apartment in the mortgage in the city, and better buy a plot of land in the suburbs and start there, slowly build a house. This option seemed much more attractive to my husband and wife, also because they could more comfortably arrange the life of Andrew's parents near them. He was a very late child, so they were already elderly people, and it was certainly better for them not to live alone further on. Doctors, by the way, were frightened by the fact that pregnancy and childbirth could negatively affect Kate's eyesight. But contrary to their gloomy expectations, her eyes fully recovered by the end of the pregnancy. And when the baby girl came into the world, Kate could admire her with clarity from the climate. And in those moments, it was so easy for her to feel happier than this woman in the world. And then a few months later, James called unexpectedly, and Andrew's first reaction was predictable. Before answering the call, he cursed out loud at his brother because he had decided that the money he had received from Lisa had certainly managed to skip out on his money and had gotten into something else. He would ask for financial help, but it wasn't like that at all. James told me timidly that he had actually sort of gotten smart. He decided to settle down in a small town. He went to study auto mechanics and even got a job at a car service. But most importantly, he met a girl and fell in love. They got married. Her name was Wendy, and she was a single mom. But James wasn't afraid of that, because he thought it was true love. "Well, let's hope things work out for him," Andrew said. When they finished talking, "Do you think so?" Kate asked him. "Why wouldn't I?" she shrugged. "After all, we're twins, and if they didn't get a little bit of his carelessness, then a little bit of my cleverness must have fallen to him." As time went on, the whole story of Andrew's crazy adventures, not that it began to be forgotten, but he himself and Kate began to return to it in conversation and thought less and less often. However, it suddenly had an unexpected sequel. Just one day, they were contacted by a lawyer who represented the interests of a foreign company that was engaged in processing fish, making various canned products from it. It turned out that this company for many years, without knowing it, had been buying illegally harvested fish. That is, poachers, and even with the use of slave labor. And naturally, when the truth came out, it was a serious blow to their reputation. To save it, the company donated a generous amount of money to environmental protection funds, promised to make better sourcing choices from now on, and also decided to pay some very substantial sums to the former captives who had taken the fish as, so to speak, financial compensation. Andrew was a little shocked, and at first even wanted to refuse the money at all. But his wife was against it. Kate insisted that he really had earned some moral compensation during his imprisonment. He deserved some moral compensation. And besides, they could use the money. They could build a house without a loan. That's what they decided to do, and that's what they did. And though neither Kate nor Andrew could predict what life had in store for them, but somehow, on some instinctive and almost mystical level, it seemed to them that they would never again face such severe shocks and dangers as they had recently experienced.